Timeless Assassin by author Raj_Shah_7152. Chapter 756 to 780. Chapter 756, Soren's Past. Timeless Assassin. Volume 8, The Last Stand. A man will tear down heaven not because it wronged him, but because it dared to exist without his permission. The universe may call it arrogance, yet to him, it is simply justice, an order restored, a hierarchy corrected. For men like those, submission is not humility, it is the quiet rot of the soul. They do not seek peace, for peace is a mirror that reflects their own insignificance. They seek conquest, not to rule others, but to silence the echo of all that dares to stand above them. For pride, once wounded, knows no God, no kin, and no end. High Chronicler Maievan Rees, Reflections of the Age Before Sin. The immediate aftermath of the Great Betrayal, 2,200 years ago, Soren's POV. Raindrops fell over Soren's head, his eyes wide with disbelief, as he stared at the haunting scene laid before him. A scene he almost couldn't believe was real. The corpse of his father lay where thunder could not reach, where the mud had already learned his outline, where the final warmth was abandoning him in quiet streams that met the rain and became thinner and thinner until they were only color. And above that stillness stood Caliph, with their father's origin daggers in his grip, as he displayed no remorse for his actions. Instead of feeling sad or guilty for betraying the man that had raised them, Caliph laughed, a wretched smirk fixed upon his face, as Soren could no longer recognize that expression as one that belonged to his brother. All around them was a shattered courtyard, the god-killing formation taking root upon it, as the Chakravya held strong. Rings within rings sealed, brightened, and dimmed again, while a lattice of geometry took shape around them, whispering a law that pinned the fourth dimension to the third the way a cruel scholar pinned a butterfly to a board. The chains it birthed were neither iron nor light, yet somehow both, as they glided through the rain as if the droplets parted in reverence to let them pass. But the moment they touched Soren, the third dimension clenched around him like a tightening fist, while the fourth turned to glass, visible yet untouchable, as though the path of height, depth, and breadth had remembered a secret axis and sworn never to speak of it again. He looked first at Caliph because he almost couldn't believe that his own brother would turn on their father. However, as he then lifted his gaze and saw the others, he realized that this was no madness born 5 minutes ago. That Caliph had been plotting to take their father down for a long time now. And that it was only him, who was learning about his true intentions today. Hey. The sound of gleeful laughter entered his ears as Morris the deceiver crouched beside his father's dead body with a hunger that had nothing to do with food, his tongue gleaming as it dragged along the dead body's open wounds as he licked the bleeding blood as if it were the most divine liquor. Thrum. Boom. Soren's aura flared with the first sound and tried to break the chains that currently held him down with the second, as he reached for the fourth dimensional axis, for the small turn inside his skull through which he could access the time stream, only to find it locked beyond reach. The Chakravya bit down. It held him in the third dimension forcibly, as no matter how hard he struggled, he just couldn't break free against the formation's overwhelming might. One rascal down. One more to go, Morris said, his voice skipping across the storm like stones on water. He bent lower and licked the blood again, savoring the fall of a legend as if triumph could be swallowed and kept warm in the belly. That act was so sick it seared a hole straight through Soren's moral code, the rage he felt numbing his mind, as his fingers curled until the chain links holding him back creaked under his power. Get off, Soren said, low at first, as if the rain itself had asked it of him. But Morris did not take him seriously, as he simply snickered and behaved like a man who had never paid full price for anything in his life. Oh yeah, or what? What will you do about it? He murmured, still licking, still nibbling at the edges of a silence that deserved reverence, while Helmuth sneered and lifted the haft of his axe until thunder ran along the grain. Caliph, kill your brother. Put him out of his misery so we can be done with this mess. Helmuth's voice cracked the air, and Caliph came forward with the origin daggers lowered like verdicts, walking the way a cliff walked toward the sea, straight and inevitable and empty of surprise. How dare you betray our father, Soren said, the words knifing their way out as he bled pressure into them. After everything he had done for us. For you. How could you? Scum. How could you be the one to kill him? Soren asked. However, Caliph did not bother answering, for he felt like he owed Soren nothing. He simply pressed the dagger toward Soren's ribs instead, and found his path blocked not by steel but by pressure. His brother's aura packed dense around his vitals until it became a translucent wall that ate momentum and returned nothing. Umph. He grunted once, then twice, pushing the way a man might push at the sea and call it rowing, but when the vitals remained inviolable, he began aiming for the edges, nicking flesh where it could not end the story, as he carved lines into Soren's arms, shoulders and lower abdomen with a patience that tasted like hate. "Look at me," Soren urged, his voice angry as he called for the traitor to show some decency. "At least look me in the eye while you do it, UFC king coward." He cursed, as Kalith lifted his gaze with anger that wanted to be a language and could not, and in that instant Soren changed the math. He twisted the pressure, not outward but down, not as a wall but as a slope, as he took advantage of Kalith's momentary distraction to slide the dagger towards the binding of his right hand, which the origin metal blade cut through like it were butter. Snap! With one hand free, his body remembered itself faster than thought, as Soren drove his fist across the small space into Kalith's jaw with a force that made Rain recoil, a blow that wrote a new rule in the bone and sent the Eternal Sovereign flying backwards. Boom! Crunch! That single attack completely dislocated Kalith's jaw from his face, as his bone hung down from loose flesh, while his mind turned blank from the pain. He had never been hit this hard in his entire life, even by melee weapons, yet Soren's punch today carried a force strong enough to shatter entire planets. "Shit, he's broken free," Su Ren said, as he and the other gods present on the scene converged on Soren's location. Su Ren moved first, his blade splitting through the rain in a silver arc as Mu Shen followed behind with his palm raised, his attack promising to erase not the body but the moment it existed in. Dutrask and Lu Han came from opposite flanks, their synchronized swings forming an X that would have decapitated any mortal caught between them, while Ruvasa weaved a spatial snare from refracted steps meant to fold Soren back into stillness. Yukiro lunged forward with the precision of a surgeon, his needle strike seeking the artery beneath the collarbone, as Morris smiled darkly and circled the edge, eager to desecrate another legend, while Helmuth thundered forward last, each footfall shaking the courtyard like a collapsing fortress. But Soren no longer saw them in motion. He no longer saw anything as linear. The world around him slowed, not because time stopped, but because his perception slipped between its cracks. To him, each droplet of rain fell one lifetime at a time, the air stretched thin enough to make thought feel endless. He reached for the fourth-dimensional stream once more, not through desperation this time, but through instinct. He bent the edges of perception, unspooling the temporal current that flowed around him like invisible light, and the instant he touched it, everything ceased to move. Rain froze mid-fall, divine spells halted mid-birth, and 8 gods were suspended mid-attack, their faces stretched between focus and fear, as Soren's voice carried softly through the void. Domain expansion, seconds walk. The air rippled. Reality folded. The silence deepened. He stepped forward, each movement precise and absolute, like a sculptor shaping eternity itself. He brushed Su Ren's sternum, right where he began gathering mana for his upcoming spell, disrupting it completely. Before then shifting past Mu Shen, striking the angle of the wrist that turned killing intent into hesitation. Dutrask's stance he disrupted with a heel pressed upon the instep, Luhan's breath he twisted by tilting his chin, sealing his throat for when the world would resume. Ruvasa's net of reflections he tore apart by touching a single knot, dissolving its logic into chaos. Yukiro's arm he redirected with a palm against his elbow, turning the blade into betrayal. Morris he slashed across the cheek, the intention being to slice apart his tongue that dared lay on his father. And finally, Helmuth, the berserker, the mountain wrapped in flesh, who stood tall even in frozen time, his grin unbroken, his fury eternal. Soren moved to him with no sound but the soft break of suspended rain. He began with the collarbone, his knuckles pressing into it until the bone hummed, and the vibration traveled through Helmuth's frame like a curse. Then came the ribs. One short, dispassionate hook that landed beneath the floating cage, a blow so precise it turned breath itself into rebellion. His thumb found the joint of the shoulder and pressed until the socket whispered surrender. 2 knuckles brushed the mastoid, painting a brief star at the edge of vision. A strike to the solar plexus followed, not in rage but with the calm of inevitability, as if teaching the body to remember weakness. He tapped the back of the knee, letting the ligaments know betrayal, then tilted the jaw slightly so the next roar would load in the wrong direction. Each touch was a word. Together, they formed a sentence. And that sentence meant defeat. Before finally, withdrawing right before his spell ended. Crack! Reality lurched back into motion, and the courtyard erupted. Su Ren folded at the chest, spitting a mouthful of blood. Mu Shen's wrist twisted, his strike recoiling into nothing. Du Trask screamed as bones shattered under his own weight. Luhan gagged on stolen air. Ruvas's mirrored net broke apart like smoke. Yukiro's blade tore through his own thigh, while Morris fell backward clutching his cheeks and tongue, and Helmuth staggered 3 steps before roaring, a roar that was half anguish, half disbelief. He raised his axe, only for his arms to fail him. His shoulders betrayed him, his ribs convulsed, his breath caught halfway to fury, and then Soren appeared before him again. A blur, silent and absolute. He struck once to the ribs, once to the jaw, once to the spine, and once more straight through the air between them, the last blow heavy enough to bend the storm around it. Helmuth's body lifted from the ground, twisting before crashing down through stone, his axe rolling from his limp hand as rain poured over him. Silence followed. A silence so deep that even thunder dared not interrupt it. Soren stood there, rain dripping down his hair, his father's blood still painting the courtyard beneath him, as he placed his father's fallen body over his shoulder. He looked at the gods gathered around him one final time. His gaze showing that this wasn't over just yet. This isn't where it ends, he whispered before stepping away, as the 4th dimension responded to him like a loyal beast. Space folded inward, light curved in reverence, and a dull token flared within his palm like a tired star. The ground beneath him cracked, the storm dimmed, and then he vanished. Only the rain remained. The Chakravya dimmed, its circles unraveling, their once perfect geometry now broken and ashamed. Around the empty space where Soren had stood, the surviving gods reassembled their faces and stared into the quiet void he had left behind. This is not over, Mu Shen said, his voice trembling. It cannot be. It is worse, Su Ren rasped, coughing blood into the mud. We let his equally strong son walk free. Morris wiped his cheek, staring at the smear of black blood on his fingers as if just finding his new number 1 opponent. While Caliph stood apart from them all, jaw shattered, eyes hollow, staring at the space where his brother had vanished. Kaboom! The rain fell harder, as if the heavens themselves mourned what they had allowed. And beneath it all, the righteous alliance finally took root, its founding gods allied not through common interests, but through the common act of betrayal they had all committed today. But even though the timeless assassin was dead, none of them celebrated. For Soren still lived, and they knew very well that leave one wolf alive, and the sheep were never safe. Chapter 757, A Sea Voyage. The Timeless Ocean, 3 weeks later, Leonardo's POV. The waves rose and fell in long, deliberate gaps, as if the timeless ocean itself was alive and testing the will of those who dared sail across its endless spine. The salt hung thick in the air, clinging to skin and steel alike, while the wind whistled through the rigging with the melancholy tune of 1,000 drowned voices. Leonardo stood at the bow of the flagship, his hands resting lightly on the damp railing as his eyes followed the horizon. Somewhere beyond that gray expanse, explorers had sworn to see it, a floating island, drifting across the clouds of mist, which disappeared as soon as one got too close. I wonder if we will encounter any dangerous monsters today, he wondered, as he glanced at the fleet sailing around him. In total, the cult had deployed 7 ships for this exploration, which sailed in a diamond formation. The main ship, which he floated on, sailed at the center, while 4 light guard boats surrounded him in a square, with 2 agile scouts flanking his either sides. Aboard one of the scouting ships, stood Anderson Silva, the monarch tactician that his uncle had sent to oversee this operation. While aboard the main ship stood Mickey James, the other cult monarch, who had an easy-going personality, and a laughter that could be heard even over the storms. Slosh. Splash. The ocean was calm today, an unnatural phenomenon within the time-stilled world, as usually it was a constant storm, which the monarchs had to carve through with their blades to ensure the fleet's safety. Unlike the others, who had a purpose and role defined on the ship, Leonardo enjoyed the privilege of being a skyshard, as he was left to his own devices, free to spend his days as he pleased. However, despite not being asked to do anything, he helped everywhere he could, and spent every spare minute learning valuable life and combat lessons from the two monarchs on board, as he tried to make the most of his time away from home. Despite being 22 and a Grand Master, this was his first real adventure, as never before had he stayed away from home for so long, or been a part of a mission so dangerous. He told himself that with Mickey and Anderson by his side, there was little to fear. For the two of them had each fought and killed beasts that could split mountains and shatter continents, so surely a voyage like this would be safe with them. However, the timeless ocean was an enigma of its own, with many monarch-tier beasts hiding inside its vast depths. Step, step, creak. The deck creaked beneath his boots as he turned toward the voices of two sailors bailing water near the port rail, their conversation rising above the crash of the waves. "Man, when do you think the Lord will stop his daily challenges against the soldiers?" one of them asked, his tone halfway between exhaustion and admiration. "Word is he's already past 700,000 wins. When will enough be enough?" "Maybe a million," the other replied, scratching his head as if unsure whether the number was absurd or inevitable. "Yeah, but don't you think it's a waste to train that way? If it were me, I'd work on speed, or learn new spells. I mean, what can he possibly gain by beating lower-tier opponents?" The first sailor's question lingered, swallowed for a moment by the sound of the waves slapping the hull, before his companion finally spoke again. "Yeah, but it's not like he makes it easy on himself. He fights with all kinds of handicaps, restricted mana, dulled weapons, zero vision or mobility. It's a miracle he still wins that much in a row." "That's true," the first admitted, his voice softening. "The Lord's power is something else. Doesn't matter how he trains, when it comes to fighting, he's unmatched." Leonardo's lips curved faintly as he listened from afar, pretending to study the sea though his ears caught every word. Their voices carried pride, respect, and awe in equal measure, and though they did not speak his uncle's name, Leonardo knew they didn't need to. It was the same man every soldier meant when they said, "the Lord." The same man who had taught Leonardo to hold a blade, to steady his breath, to never fear the silence before a fight. A warmth stirred within him, fleeting but sincere. Hearing the men of the cult speak of his uncle that way filled him with quiet pride, and perhaps, a little envy. Because one day, he wanted them to speak of him the same way. One day, he wanted to become a man as great as his uncle. "Father says that I have more talent than him when it comes to fighting. But that I'm still not as good as Uncle." Despite never having trained a day in his life until the age of 20, Uncle still managed to become transcendent before turning 25. "While I'm still a far cry from that tier. Haha, sometimes I feel like nobody can be as good as Uncle. But I can at least try." Leonardo mused to himself as he turned back toward the open sea, his eyes fixed on the horizon that refused to end, as thunder murmured in the far distance and the scent of rain grew sharper. "A storm is coming," he judged, as soon, he heard men repeating the same. "A storm's coming," one said, tightening the ropes. "Aye, a big one," another replied, glancing nervously toward the horizon. The sails creaked as the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain. The once steady sea began to stir, the rhythm of the waves turning uneven, while the sky dimmed a shade darker. Leonardo exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving the distance, as he prepared for a rough few hours of sailing. There was a 50-50 chance that the storm would be accompanied by a mind illusion of sorts. For somehow, that was how the pattern had been since the start of their journey 3 weeks ago. Chapter 758, True Power. The Timeless Ocean. A few minutes later, Leonardo's POV. The storm encompassed the entire fleet within mere moments, the sails suddenly fluttering, while torrential rain hit the upper deck. Thud, wobble, thunder. Waves crashed against the hull like fists, the ships groaning as their masts strained under the weight of lightning that clawed at the heavens. Leonardo steadied himself by the rail, his cloak snapping wildly behind him as his heartbeat fought to keep pace with the storm. The air shimmered faintly, and through the sound of thunder, something else began to whisper. It was soft at first. Familiar. "Leonardo, my boy." The voice came gentle, almost loving, curling into his ear like a memory from childhood. It was his grandmother's voice, the same tone that used to call him in from the courtyard for dinner, the same warmth he had missed dearly for these past few months. He froze. His breath caught. Then another voice followed, fragile but distinct. "Leonardo, help me find my glasses, I've seemed to have misplaced them." the voice said, as Leonardo recognized it to be his grandfather. The same man whose grave he had visited every month for the past couple years. The same man who had been his best friend growing up. Whoosh! Howl! The wind howled louder, but somehow the whispers carried through it, clear as thought, weaving themselves into the rhythm of the storm, as Leonardo struggled to separate reality from fiction. Across the deck, other sailors were beginning to hear their own ghosts as well, some crying, others laughing, a few whispering back as if they believed what they saw. "Honey, I swear it wasn't me who ate the last piece," one man called out, looking terrified of whatever he saw. "Leora, is that really you?" cried another, tears streaming down his cheeks as he staggered toward the edge of the deck. "Don't listen to the voices. Keep your heads about yourselves, lads." Mickey James's roar tore through the madness like a blade. His voice cut through the wind, shaking men from their trance as he gripped the mainmast, the mana around his body surging like fire. But not all of them listened. 2 soldiers leapt overboard before anyone could stop them, one screaming, "Genevieve! I'm coming for you, my love," and the other shouting, "Lord Dragon! I won't let you be humiliated. I'll protect your honor." Both disappeared instantly beneath the waves, their cries swallowed by the ocean's maw as the storm hissed and crackled above. Leonardo pressed his palms against his temples, forcing the voices back, forcing himself to breathe. His grandmother's tone lingered still, soft, pleading, calling him home. But he told his mind that this could not be true. That she was already dead and that it should not be hearing her voice. Which helped him regain some semblance of clarity. Whiissssshhh. At this point, the wind began to scream louder and the rain turned into a downpour so thick that the horizon vanished completely. Sailors could no longer control the sails, while the entire ship trembled precariously from side to side. "It's getting too dangerous. We need to steer out of this storm, and fast," Leonardo muttered. However, there was no one around him to hear his voice. Thankfully for him though, Anderson Silva moved through the storm, stepping to the bow of his ship, spear in hand, his mana flaring into a torrent of white gold light that shone bright in the dark storm. Swoosh! Slash! Each swing of his weapon carved through the storm, tearing through the illusionary haze as arcs of energy burst across the clouds. The air cracked and the rain shifted, the world itself seeming to bend beneath the sheer precision of his control. Leonardo watched, awestruck, as Anderson cut through the tempest one layer at a time, each strike peeling the storm open like tearing cloth. Lightning struck him, but he didn't falter. Winds howled, but he stood unwavering. Until slowly but surely, he whittled the storm down, making it grow weaker and weaker. A minute soon turned to 20, and by the time his spear lowered, the clouds above had thinned into streaks of silver mist. Silence followed. The sea leveled, its fury retreating into calm, as the light of the twilight sky bled softly through the clouds. Anderson stood still at the prow, his cloak drenched, his expression unreadable, while Mickey's laughter echoed faintly from across the deck. Leonardo exhaled, steadying his breath, as he stared at the sky that had tried to break them and failed, as he realized just how dangerous such expeditions could really be. If not for their fleet having 2 monarchs on board, such a storm would most likely claim a lot more lives than just 2, as Leonardo realized just how strong one had to be to level the odds in their favor, in a ruthless world such as this. The realization sank into him like a slow tide, cold and unrelenting. Power was everything in this world. It decided who lived, who led, and who vanished nameless into the depths. No amount of kindness or talent mattered without it. Watching Anderson stand against the storm alone, cutting through what seemed divine in nature, Leonardo finally understood what separated men like him from the rest. It was not birthright, nor skill, nor destiny. It was will, the kind that refused to yield even when the heavens themselves turned hostile. He clenched his fists, staring at his own trembling hands. Despite being a Grand Master, he knew he was still too weak to change anything, too weak to command the sea, the sky, or fate. If this is what true strength looks like, he muttered under his breath, then I'm nowhere close. The thought stung, yet it ignited something within him, a flicker of resolve that burned brighter than fear. He would not settle for comfort, or for pride inherited from another man's shadow. He would chase that kind of power, the kind that could silence storms and illusions alike, even if it took him a lifetime to reach it. For strength was not merely survival. It was freedom. Chapter 759, Low Spirits. 33 days into the voyage, the timeless ocean, approaching the reported company ordinates. After a month of sailing the vast expanse of the timeless ocean, the fleet finally approached the reported coordinates where the island was last spotted with barely concealed excitement. Everyone wanted to see for themselves as to whether or not the stories were real, and hence, for half a day, almost every crew member loitered on the deck, peering hard into the horizon for some mysterious floating structure, only to be disappointed when they found nothing. It was AFC King scam. I can't believe I voluntarily signed up for this expedition. I can't believe I missed my child's birth for this mission. The soldiers cursed while pretending to stay busy, as they busied their hands and hid their faces. I swear, Commander, it is not a sailor's tale, the junior soldier said, his palms open to the air as if truth might sit there if given the chance. I saw it myself on my last expedition. It was right here on these coordinates. He swore, as Commander Anderson Silva stared at him for a long moment, before then looking at the gray sweep of water before the ship, that looked the same as anywhere else, his eyes as disappointed as those of his men. Do you know the logistics cost of this mission, Chuck? He asked at last, voice even and heavy. Lord Shadow Dragon has risked 2 tons of food and weeks of time for hundreds of men to come out here. What do I tell him when we go back, That we saw nothing. Chuck lowered his head as if the ocean had suddenly grown taller. I swear I saw it, Commander. Although I remember, it was not at the same place the men before us reported. It was farther west. 40 miles at least. Maybe because it is truly floating, it is never in one place. If we look around, it should be close. From the quarterdeck Mickey James let out a long breath that sounded like laughter with the joy boiled out of it. He came down the steps in 3 easy strides and set a hand on the rail. Chuck, 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 he said, rolling the name like a stone in his mouth. How many times have I told you to lay off the alcohol? It is not good for you. You have the tiniest capacity I have ever seen. Like, who even gets drunk from a single beer? He reprimanded, as Anderson made a disgusted expression at the remark, clearly disappointed in Chuck for being unable to hold his liquor. Commander, if all a man ever drinks is whiskey, and then he switches to beer, it is absorbed faster. It really was not my fault. Chuck clarified, his ears turning red, as he lowered his gaze. However, Mickey had none of it, as he raised his palm to cut him off, his tone not angry, only disappointed. Save it. We are at the end of the world and you are a light drinker, and that's that. Anderson watched the exchange without visible amusement, then looked back to the blank water that had consumed their time. Well, he said, tone turning practical, since we are already here, it will not hurt to circle these waters. We sweep in a widening square. If your island is a wanderer, we may yet catch its shadow. He suggested, as Mickey shrugged with one shoulder, neither eager nor opposed to the proposal. A sweep it is. 20 minutes per leg. Keep spacing tight. If a beast breaks the surface, we cut before it breathes twice. Orders ran down the masts and through the rigging with the practiced rhythm of routine, while the steady thud of drums rolled across the decks, setting the fleet in motion. The light guard boats drifted outward to their posts, the 2 scouts slid to the flanks like hounds catching a scent, and the heavy main ship turned with slow, deliberate grace, as if the ocean itself bowed to its movement. Chuck kept his eyes fixed on the western quarter, watching the horizon with the stubborn faith of a man daring the ocean to tell the truth. While Anderson stood behind him, hands clasped neatly, counting the rhythm of the waves with silent precision, as Mickey hummed a tuneless melody beside him that rose and fell with the wind. Soon, the fleet traced its first square across the waters and found nothing but the endless gray. While trying again only brought a broken piece of driftwood that might once have been a tree into view. With the third yielded even less, as the wind shifted by degrees and the light dimmed to a colder hue. No island showed its face. No miracle disturbed the calm tyranny of distance. Yet a quiet persistence settled over the men, the unyielding kind that often kept sailors working long after reason had gone to sleep. AFK it. Time to widen the scope of the search. Anderson said, as he lifted his hand again to signal the shift in formation, which the men obeyed without question. Soon, the pattern widened, the search stretching farther into the unknown. Hours crawled by in silence, the kind that gnawed at patience until even the creak of the planks began to sound like accusation. The men who had started the morning with wonder now stared at the horizon with empty eyes, caught somewhere between disbelief and resignation. The ocean before them, vast and indifferent, reflecting nothing but their futility. Mickey leaned lazily against the railing, his earlier cheer dimmed. "You know, Anderson," he muttered, voice half swallowed by the wind, "if I didn't know better, I'd say we are brainless cocksuckers out here chasing unicorns." Anderson's gaze never wavered from the water. "We might just be that," he replied, his tone equally unoptimistic, when suddenly, "Commander! Commander!" a shout came from the lower deck. The voice belonging to none other than the young master, Leonardo Skyshard. Chapter 760, Unexpected Breakthrough. The Timeless Ocean, Leonardo's POV. Just like the other men on board, Leonardo too felt the small ache of disappointment grab him when he failed to see the floating island upon reaching the designated coordinates. Secretly, he had somehow been hoping that he would be the one to uncover the secret of that mysterious island, proving his worth as a reliable nephew to his uncle. However, those dreams began to get crushed in real time now, when despite arriving at the location, he saw nothing worthwhile. Was it really a sailor's tale? Nothing more than a ruse. He wondered, as he gazed at the horizon in disappointment, ready to retire to his quarters for the night, when suddenly, a flicker of golden light appeared in his peripheral vision. It was neither bright, nor large, only a faint golden blink at the very edge of his vision, which appeared only for the briefest second before disappearing again. "The hell?" he muttered, as he rubbed at his eyes and looked again, only to see the wide gray that had been taunting them since morning. "Huh," he said to nobody in particular, as he talked to himself just to make sure he wasn't hallucinating this stuff. "Did I see light there?" he asked himself, as he forced his eyes to scan the rigs and the sea in measured lines, counting heartbeats so that his eyes would not play tricks, and just as he was ready to abandon the notion, the gold appeared again, not quite a spark, more like an ember breathed upon, which went out as quick as it appeared. Could I be hallucinating? He let the words anchor his doubt, then refused the anchor and cupped his hands to his mouth. "Commander! Commander!" he called, as within seconds boots tapped the deck behind him. Anderson and Mickey landed beside him instantly, their faces contorted in confusion. "Yes, young lord," Anderson said, his eyes already surveying the water for danger. "What is it?" "Turn the fleet slightly to the left," Leonardo answered, pointing with the simple certainty of a boy telling a truth he did not have time yet to doubt. "I think there is something there." He pointed, as both monarchs narrowed their eyes into the wind, reading distances and densities, as they surveyed every minor detail in that direction. Unfortunately, there was nothing obvious to see, only the same infuriating plainness that had greeted them all day. However, just because it was Leonardo Skyshard who had pointed this phenomenon out, they could not dismiss him outright either. "Ah, I think I see something there too," Mickey murmured, although he did not see jack shit. While Anderson raised his eyebrow in confusion, as he toyed with the notion of refusing orders he had not been given, before ultimately deciding against it. "Port 3 points west," he said while pulling out a crystal communicator. "Maintain spacing. Scouts hold the line. We sail onwards for another 40 miles. The command rippled outward. The bows shifted. The fleet swung by a slow sweep to the left, the heavy ship answering first and the smaller boats correcting in tidy arcs until the diamond found its new angle. The ocean did not change character. The sky did not send a sign. But time began to perform its small trick of stretching when watched, as 30 minutes became long enough for men to doubt themselves and each other. Another dud. FCK me, I'll go mental at this rate. Someone swore softly, as the collective impatience grew. However, just as the soldiers felt like they were about to go mental, the island suddenly burst into view from behind a cover of storm clouds, as it floated above the ocean like a huge destroyer ship. It looked less like an island and more like a continent adrift in its own calm, as cliffs rose through thin clouds while waterfalls fell and vanished mid-air before curling back upward. The underside glowed with sunlight, which looked almost like the glow of an actual star, which although wasn't born from nuclear fusion, was still warm on the skin. "Distance," Anderson said without raising his voice. "Approximately 100 kilometers," the forward scout replied, the words cracking once before finding the right pitch. Mickey let out a breath that could have been a laugh if anyone had earned laughter yet. "Well, young lord," he said with pride, "it seems you were right to see something this way." He complimented, as Leonardo did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood very still with his fingers tight on the rail, as he saw the third color of the aura manual unfold before him. The entire island looked golden in his eyes, which signified the color of fate. A color so brilliant and mesmerizing, that he almost lost his breath for a second. Cheers. Whistles. The men around him broke into tiny celebrations, as they couldn't believe that this wild goose chase was actually more than a ruse. However, just as they began getting rowdy, their superiors began to pass down orders like the whip, as with a goal in sight, they demanded everyone to be absolutely focused now and not make any mistakes. Hold speed, Anderson said. No hero work. Scouts extend by one length and watch the air as well as the water. We do not want it to disappear before us now. Understood, came the chorus, steady now that the world had given them something to chase. The fleet slid forward with a quiet made from discipline rather than fear. On the main deck, Mickey tipped 2 fingers against his brow in Leonardo's direction without ceremony and then returned to his post, while Anderson kept his gaze on the floating mass as if he intended to memorize it before it decided to move again. Chuck stood at the rail and tried not to smile the way a man smiled when the universe forgave them by accident. While Leonardo held the island in his sight and allowed himself one last smile before recalling his duty, as he pulled out a crystal communicator, and placed a direct call to his uncle, Leo. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 761, A Glimmer of Hope. The Timeless Ocean, Leonardo's POV. The faint hum of the crystal communicator filled the air as Leonardo poured his mana into it, his pulse thudding with an excitement he could barely contain. The deck still buzzed faintly behind him, sailors whispering, ropes groaning under tension, but all of it blurred into a background haze the moment a familiar voice crackled through. Leonardo. What is it? Leo said from the other end, as Leonardo beamed hearing his voice. Uncle, it's true, he said, barely able to hold back his grin. The island, I see it. It's floating, just like the stories said. And there's something else. I can see a golden aura around it, bright and alive, like fate itself. For a moment, silence answered him. Then Leo's breath came sharp through the channel. Golden aura. Yes, Leonardo continued eagerly. It's faint, but it's there. Like the whole island is glowing from within. On the other end, Leo's eyes narrowed, the gleam of the holographic feed casting half his face in light. His voice dropped low, heavy with something between disbelief and caution. Leonardo, listen to me carefully, he said. You stay clear of it. Do not approach the island under any circumstances. Leonardo blinked, confusion replacing his earlier thrill. But uncle. No, Leo cut in. You don't understand. Gold doesn't always mean fortune. It can be as dangerous as it is divine. The aura you're describing could signify an imbalance, a place where risk and reward are aplenty. Leonardo hesitated, gripping the railing beside him. But what if it's something good? What if it's... There's no, what if, when it comes to your safety, Leonardo. You are Luke's boy, and I'll be damned if I ever let anything happen to you. Leo said, as his tone hardened. I've seen this before. Gold can either crown you or consume you, and it never warns you which until it's too late. Tell Commander Anderson to keep visual contact but maintain distance. I'll bring a destroyer ship and join you as soon as I can. The command left no room for argument. Yet Leonardo's heart sank, the rush in his veins ebbing into quiet defiance. Yes, uncle, he said softly. The call ended with a faint click. The communicator's glow dimming, as it left Leonardo alone to stare at the endless gray ocean once again. He stood there for a long while, the wind teasing his hair, the golden reflection flickering faintly in his eyes. A swirl of emotions churned inside him, gratitude for his uncle's concern, yes, but also a growing frustration. He had trained all his life under the shadow of giants. His father's legacy, his uncle's legend, both had been carved in trials, in battles where they faced the impossible and won. But whenever his turn came, they wrapped him in caution, in safety, in rules meant to protect him from the very crucible that had forged them. Stay clear of it, he whispered, repeating the command under his breath, as his jaw tightened. Is that what you would have said to yourself? Before you became who you are? He looked up again at the golden island, its reflection shimmering over the restless ocean like a heartbeat that refused to fade. Maybe this was reckless. Maybe it was foolish. But greatness never waited for permission. Sigh. Leonardo exhaled slowly, resolve hardening behind his calm eyes. All right then, he murmured to himself, as the wind carried his words away. Let's see if this is luck or doom. He turned toward the helm, the faint gleam of the island lighting his path like a silent challenge waiting to be met, as he chose not to relay his uncle's instructions to Commander Anderson. Meanwhile, Leo did not waste a second after the call ended. The moment the crystal communicator dimmed, he was already reaching for another, flicking through encrypted channels until the line connected. Chaosbringer, he said sharply. My lord, came the familiar voice, smooth and steady despite the static of distance. I need a jet at once. The fastest one we have. I want it prepped for long-range travel and ready for takeoff within 10 minutes. There was a pause, short but knowing. Destination: Timeless Ocean, Western Quadrant. I'll send you the coordinates. Leonardo's fleet has found something, and I intend to see it for myself. The faint sound of papers shuffling echoed through the receiver, followed by the click of a mechanical console. Understood. I'll reroute our fastest jet to you at once. ETA, 12 minutes. Good, Leo replied, his tone clipped yet calm as the line clicked off, and silence reclaimed the room. Leo's reflection in the glass wall stared back at him, calm yet restless, as he suppressed the unrest in his surging aura. Multheric, he murmured, the name heavy on his tongue. For over 20 years, he had searched for the fallen dragon's resting place, following trails so faint they could barely be called clues. Myths, whispers, fragments of records buried in archaeological discoveries, all of them had led him nowhere, until now. However, this time this floating island covered in golden aura of fate showed promise. If the aura Leonardo saw was truly gold, then there was a chance, faint yet real, that Multherac's remains were there. Perhaps even his soul. Leo's pulse quickened as he dressed up for combat once more, this time without his restraints, as he placed his utility belt across his waist. With Vare's execution drawing near, he muttered, I need answers. I need Multheric. He turned toward the window, watching the faint glimmer of the twilight sky before him. With his ancient wisdom, maybe, just maybe, he can help me save Vare. A low rumble interrupted his thoughts, the unmistakable thunder of jet engines rolling across the airfield outside. The windows vibrated faintly, and a faint trail of smoke cut across the darkening sky. Leo's gaze hardened. He tightened the strap of his utility belt and stepped out without hesitation. There was no more time to waste. For the first time in 2 decades, there was a chance for him to see an old friend. Chapter 762 Hard to understand. The Timeless Ocean, Leonardo's POV. The cult fleet sailed steadily toward its destination. The 100-kilometer gap had shrunk to under 20 in just over an hour, as the men kept their eyes glued to the mysterious island that hovered ahead of them like a mirage that refused to fade. Leonardo stood at the bow, his knuckles white around the rail as the wind whipped against his face. By now, he had made up his mind to explore the island despite his uncle's apprehension, as he hyped himself up internally to make the most of this rare chance. Nothing in life ever falls to men who don't take chances. Wasn't that something Mum used to say all the time? He wondered, recalling the phrase vividly, as if her voice still lingered in his ears, as he used it to justify what he was about to do. At my age, uncle and father were already dominating their home planet's population as VR gamers. They were legends. If they could handle the thrill, so can I. He thought, as with every passing second, excitement coursed deeper through his veins, urging him to carve the first line of his own legend. Commander Anderson stood beside him, his posture rigid yet calm, as his sharp gaze stayed fixed ahead. The floating island had not shifted once since they had first sighted it, and yet something about its stillness felt unnatural, as if it was not tethered to anything solid, and still, it did not drift, did not move, did not obey the winds. This contradiction unsettled Anderson, who frowned quietly while his mind turned over possibilities that refused to make sense. Commander Silva. Commander. A frantic voice burst from the crystal communicator, snapping him. From thought. Go ahead, I'm listening, Silva replied. Sir, it's gone. The words came out fractured by static, yet heavy with disbelief. Repeat that, Anderson said, his brow tightening. The island, sir, it's gone. We can't see it anymore. It was right there a moment ago, and now, a brief pause followed, punctuated by the crackle of the communicator. Now there's nothing. Just sky and water. Leonardo's eyes widened as he leaned forward, staring at the massive floating island that was still clearly visible before him. What did they mean it's gone? It's right there, he said, bewildered. Anderson pointed toward the floating mass that shimmered faintly under the twilight sky, its presence undeniable from the flagship's deck. But the captain of the scout ship sounded equally sure of his claim. We are positive, sir. None of the men aboard can see it anymore. Anderson raised an eyebrow, his voice turning firm. All ships, hold position. Drop anchors at once. Pull back the sails and lock formation. Now. The command raced across the fleet as men scrambled to obey. Boots thundered against the deck and chains clattered as the massive anchors plunged into the sea, their heavy iron coils unspooling like serpents into the depths. The sails folded in crisp rhythm, and within moments the fleet came to a grinding halt, the creak of wood echoing against the sudden stillness. Only the sound of water lapping against the hull remained, quiet and constant. Leonardo's eyes darted from horizon to horizon, as the island still floated before him in all its impossible glory. Scout 1, confirm your coordinates, Anderson ordered, his tone deceptively calm. Same as yours, Commander, came the reply, laced with confusion. 5 kilometers ahead. Dead center. Anderson and Mickey exchanged a long look, both sensing the same unease beneath the other's calm exterior. I still see it clear as day, Mickey said slowly, squinting into the distance. There's no way they can't. Maybe it's an illusion, Anderson replied, though his tone lacked conviction, because no illusion could ever be this intricate, not without an elaborate mana array to sustain it. Mickey didn't argue. He simply adjusted his gloves, summoned his mana, and nodded once toward Anderson. Fly with me. Let's take a closer look. Both monarchs lifted into the air, their cloaks fluttering behind them, as they cut through the wind. Whiz! *TRRR. The sound of air slicing past filled their ears as they rose higher and began to glide toward the island, cautious yet steady. 15 kilometers to the island. 13, 12, 10. That was when it happened. One moment, the island gleamed before them in full detail, cliffs of green and stone rising through a halo of cloud, sunlight curling beneath its edge, and in the next, it was gone. Vanished. No sound, no ripple, no distortion. Just the cold, empty sky. Mickey slowed mid-flight, eyes scanning wildly. Anderson, I can't see it anymore. Can you? Anderson stopped beside him, his gaze sweeping across the same horizon. No, he said quietly. It's gone for me too. They hovered there for several long breaths, neither speaking, the silence pressing heavy on the wind. Could it be cloaking? Mickey asked at last, his tone low. Some kind of dimensional veil. Anderson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he flew backward, several dozen meters, then another 100, testing the distance. But the island did not reappear. The massive landmass that had occupied 40% of their vision was gone entirely, swallowed by the endless gray. Mickey frowned and followed, his voice uneasy. It's not a distance issue then. Once it disappears, it stays gone. Like it wipes itself out of existence. They concluded, as they exchanged a long, troubled glance before finally deciding to pull back, their trip back to the ship short, as they landed with a loud thud. You men still see it? Anderson asked, as soon as he returned, as he scanned the confused faces of the crew. Yes, sir, one of the sailors answered quickly. Clear as the sun itself. He said, as his answer made Mickey run a hand through his salt-damp hair in sheer disbelief. This is some spooky shit, I'm telling you. We got too close, and poof, it's just gone. No fade, no shimmer, nothing. Just empty air. Leonardo stepped forward, his brows furrowed. But how can that be? We're all looking at the same thing. He argued, however. Anderson only exhaled slowly in response, his tone grim. Maybe we're not, he said, as the three men stood at the bow in silence, the twilight deepening around them as they tried to come up with some logical explanation for this bizarre phenomenon. The massive island still glimmered faintly for those who could see it, while for others it had vanished completely, leaving only the endless ocean and a question that refused to be answered. Chapter 763 Sudden Disappearance. The Timeless Ocean, Leonardo's POV. For a while, everyone aboard the flagship looked confused on what to do next, as they failed to decode the mystery of this floating island. Well, we have established that it disappears for anyone who gets too close to it. And that pulling back doesn't work, for once it disappears for you, you can't see it no matter how far back you go, Mickey said, rubbing his forehead in frustration while pacing across the deck. Anderson scratched his head, staring into the pale horizon that looked no different from a blank sheet of steel. Yeah, but you're forgetting Chuck, he said. He saw the floating island during the last expedition, and it disappeared for him then. Yet now, it's reappeared for him again. He can still see it, which means there's a time limit attached to whatever spell is affecting us right now. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The fact that Chuck could still see the island made the situation even stranger. They called for him, and soon enough, Chuck climbed up the steps to the command deck, his face red from both nervousness and salt-laden wind. Commander, he asked, stopping before the two monarchs. Can you still see the island? Anderson asked, voice steady yet faintly curious. Chuck nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Same as before. Right there, above the mist line. Bright as the sun. Mickey folded his arms, narrowing his eyes as if trying to glimpse through the illusion himself. And how long has it been since your last expedition? Chuck scratched his neck, thinking. Almost 95 days, sir. Maybe a bit more. I lose track of time while in the sea. That answer didn't satisfy anyone. So the spell resets, Anderson muttered to himself. Once you lose sight of it, it locks you out for a fixed duration, but eventually you regain the ability. Which means, Mickey interrupted, whoever made this place didn't want visitors, but maybe friends and family could enter. The remark drew murmurs from the sailors nearby, as Anderson remained silent for a few seconds, his mind turning over the pieces. No one could tell with certainty as to what the mystery behind this giant floating island was, however, everyone began to make a plausible theory in their own heads regardless. Leonardo listened quietly from the side, his eyes flicking between the two commanders and the faint shimmer of gold still visible in the far distance, as the crew's confusion only deepened his own thoughts. Maybe only fated people can see it after a certain point. Maybe I'll be able to see it even after I get too close. He thought, as he tightened his grip on the railing, the idea leaving a strange chill down his spine. Commander, Leonardo called suddenly, stepping forward, as Anderson turned to him at once, straightening. Yes, young lord. I want to go closer, Leonardo said, his tone calm but filled with conviction. I want to see the point where it disappears for myself. The deck fell silent, even the sounds of uncertain footsteps stopping briefly, as Mickey blinked at him in disbelief. You want to do what? He asked, as Leonardo raised his hands in self-defense. I know it sounds reckless, but I need to see how it happens. Maybe the effect won't work on me, Leonardo suggested, as Anderson frowned deeply at the proposal. That's not a risk we can take, young lord. Your uncle gave us strict orders to ensure your safety. So, if something goes wrong, then it's my responsibility, Leonardo interrupted. Uncle sent me on this expedition for a reason. He said I have a special sight that others don't. And if that's true, then I might be able to see what none of you can. Anderson hesitated, caught between duty and logic, as Mickey threw his hands in the air. The young lord's got guts, we need to give him that, but it's not just his neck on the line here, it's ours too. So we need to think this through for sure, he said to Anderson, who rubbed his chin in contemplation. Sometimes, the only way to understand a mystery is to step into it. I'll take a small unit. 1 rowboat, 2 soldiers. Nothing more. If you're afraid about my safety, follow behind me. If the island disappears for me too, I'll retreat immediately, if not, keep following me, I guess. Leonardo pressed, as Anderson looked at him for a long time, before letting out a deep sigh. Fine, he said at last, though his voice came slow. You'll take 1 rowboat unit and stay in constant communication. The moment anything feels wrong, you pull back immediately. Understood, he instructed, as Leonardo nodded firmly. Minutes later, a lightweight evacuation rowboat was prepared and lowered into the water, with 2 soldiers to man it joining him, as they took up the oars and began rowing. Slur. The boat began to make its way towards the island, as Mickey and Anderson followed from above, hovering in the air to watch from a close distance, their senses alert to scan for any and all signs of danger. All right, Anderson said over the communicator. Maintain heading toward the forward scout ship, the island should disappear for you as soon as you cross its rear end. Understood, Commander, Leonardo replied, as the rowboat continued to glide smoothly over the calm waves. The timeless ocean stretched endlessly ahead, still and deceptive, while the golden glow of the floating island kept growing stronger. With each passing second, 2 kilometers, one of the soldiers on the rowboat reported softly, 500 meters. 100. They kept approaching, until exactly at the 0 meters mark, when the tip of the rowboat crossed the back end of the forward scout ship. The floating island disappeared from sight for the 2 soldiers, as the massive island was replaced by the twilight sky in their visions. What? Just where did it go? The soldiers blinked, their expressions turning confused. Commander, one of them said, voice rising, I think something's interfering with. But before he could finish, a sharp flash burst before their eyes. Shine. Leonardo felt the world lurch around him, as the sound of the ocean disappeared from his ears and the rowboat faded out from around him. The soldiers froze where they were, eyes wide, unable to comprehend what they had just seen. One moment Leonardo had been there, sitting calmly between them. And the next, the seat was empty, his presence erased as if he had never existed. Commander, he's gone. One of them shouted through the communicator, his voice cracking. Above, Anderson and Mickey had seen it too, the sudden disappearance, the brief flash of blinding light, and then nothing. What in the hell just happened? Mickey muttered, his voice low but shaken. Where the FCK is the Shadow Dragon's nephew? He asked, as his body began to tremble from fear. FCKED. That's what we will be, if the Shadow Dragon comes here. And we haven't found his nephew. F*CK, I knew this was a bad idea. Anderson began, however, he too could not complete the sentence, as just the thought of the Shadow Dragon coming here and losing control over his killing intent made him quake in his boots. Chapter 764 Too weak. The mysterious floating island, Leonardo's POV. Shine. The world exploded into light, and for a moment Leonardo felt as though his body had been scattered into 1,000 smaller fragments that he had no control over whatsoever. Gasp. His breath got caught in his chest as gravity slipped away, only for him to find himself standing in a completely different place a few seconds later, as the faint hum of ancient magic buzzed at his feet. He blinked, feeling disoriented, until the sight that stretched before him stole the little breath he had left. Stretching endlessly in every direction lay a stone expanse unlike anything he had ever seen. The ground beneath him shimmered with a faint luster, carved from a material that looked almost alive. Dark and metallic, etched with veins of light that pulsed slowly, as if the island itself was breathing. Every few seconds, a low vibration rippled through the platform, subtle but rhythmic, like the distant echo of a slumbering heart. Leonardo took a cautious step forward, his boots clicking softly against the stone, as he found himself surrounded by towering pillars that spiraled into the mist above. Each pillar was carved in intricate detail, wings unfurling, talons stretching, eyes that seemed to follow him no matter where he turned. The craftsmanship was beyond comprehension, precise and yet raw, as if the builders had been creatures of strength rather than finesse. This is incredible, he murmured, his voice swallowed by the vastness. Ahead, enormous archways lined the horizon, rising and folding in one another like the ribs of some long-forgotten giant. The scale of it all was wrong, too vast, too high, too heavy, yet every angle felt deliberate, every design part of a greater rhythm. As a faint breeze passed through, carrying with it the scent of scorched stone and something faintly metallic, Leonardo's gaze drifted upward. The sky above was the same twilight gray, which assured him that he was still within the time-stilled world, even if he had been teleported to some mysterious island. Who could have built something like this? He wondered out loud, his pulse steady but his mind reeling, as he tried to figure out the race of this island's creator, which he felt certain wasn't human. However, what he wasn't aware of, was that his arrival on the island had stirred something ancient from its long and dreamless slumber, as deep beneath the surface of the colossal structure, a consciousness older than modern history opened one eye. Multheric, the ancient beast god, sensed an intruder at his resting place. A mere ant. The voice echoed faintly through the hollows of eternity, curious yet slow, like a mountain remembering how to speak. Is someone here? The air around the island thickened, as though the very fabric of existence hesitated to carry his voice. Then, the world moved. Groan. The sound that followed was not of rock cracking or air shifting, but rather the sound of creation itself stretching after being still for too long. The island trembled, great veins of light pulsing through the metal stone beneath Leonardo's feet, as the powerful vibrations coursed up through his legs, through his bones, until they reached his chest and stole the rhythm from his heart. What the? His words died halfway, as an unseeable force rippled outward from the heart of the island. It was not wind. It was not mana. It was aura. Ancient. Colossal. Sentient. The world seemed to fold under its weight as every atom of air screamed to bow. Leonardo's knees buckled instantly, his body crashing onto the metallic floor. Thud. His mind barely registered the impact against the pressure bearing down on him, a pressure so immense it made the space around him feel like it was being crushed inward. He tried to raise his head, but his muscles refused, for the weight pressing down on him was not physical, but rather something deeper, something primal that reached into the core of his being and reminded him what it meant to be prey. What is this, pressure? He gasped, his voice barely a breath as his chest struggled to rise. Every inhale felt like trying to draw air through stone, as the shimmering veins of light beneath him began to dim, flickering under the oppressive aura that now saturated the island. Thoom. The ground pulsed again, harder this time. The pillars surrounding him shuddered and fractured slightly near their bases, dust falling like rain as the carvings of wings and claws seemed to twist subtly, as though the stone itself was coming alive to bear witness. Leonardo's body trembled violently as his palms pressed against the cold metal. His vision blurred. Blood trickled from his nose and ears, his body convulsing as his veins screamed in agony from the sheer pressure flooding through them. His mind, usually sharp and composed, was reduced to chaos. Every thought fragmented, every sense overloaded. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He wanted to breathe, but there was no air left to take. His world narrowed to the sound of his heartbeat hammering once, twice, and then slowing, as each beat dragged out longer than the last. The aura crushing him felt alive, intelligent, and terrifyingly aware. It did not seek to kill him, yet its mere existence erased the illusion of equality between gods and men. He was nothing here, an insect trespassing upon something far beyond comprehension. Leonardo's fingers clawed weakly at the stone, his nails scraping sparks that faded before they touched air. His vision filled with darkness edging in from all sides, as tears of strain gathered in his eyes. I can't breathe. The thought rang in his mind, faint and failing, as he felt his consciousness slip like sand through a broken hourglass. Then, as his last bit of strength left him, he finally succumbed to the overwhelming might. His body stilled, his eyes rolled back, his breath ceased, as he passed out. And in that moment, the island grew quiet again. As deep within the heart of the colossal structure, the ancient consciousness stirred fully now, its awareness spreading across the island like liquid fire. Multharak's soul opened one massive eye within the void of his prison, his tone somewhere between amusement and faint guilt. Oh, he rumbled softly, his voice rippling through the bones of the island. Did the ant faint just because I stirred awake? He paused, as faint traces of curiosity tinged his next thought. Humans are fragile little things. The ground pulsed once more, this time gently, like a heartbeat. Easing back into rhythm, the oppressive pressure withdrew slowly, retreating back into the island's core until the silence became absolute again. Only Leonardo's motionless body remained upon the shining floor, his faint breathing returning little by little, as the ancient beast god that ruled this forgotten place returned to his half-slumber, muttering softly in the depths of eternity. Sleep well, little one. You clearly stepped into a world not made for you. Chapter 765 Leo arrives. The timeless ocean, Anderson and Mickey's POV. The deck had never felt heavier. Wind howled faintly over the water as Commander Mickey James and Commander Anderson Silva stood frozen at the bow, the stillness around them broken only by the slow creak of wood and the rhythmic lap of waves against the hull. Both men looked pale, their faces drained of color, as though every drop of blood in their bodies had realized what was about to happen before their minds could accept it. Where is the young lord? Mickey muttered, his voice barely rising above the whisper of the sea breeze. He just disappeared. Anderson crouched down, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands gripping his hair as he stared at the faint ripples where Leonardo had disappeared from the rowboat just minutes ago. His expression was blank, the kind that only came when a man's brain refused to process the enormity of what had transpired. I don't know, Mickey, he said at last, his tone hollow, as the weight of that admission seemed to crush him even further. I would suggest trying to search for the young lord on that invisible island that we can no longer see, but I don't even know how to do that anymore. He dragged his palms down his face, letting out a long exhale that trembled at the edges. I should have told him no. I shouldn't have let him go on his own. He lamented, as for a few moments, neither of them spoke. The air itself seemed to grow heavier with every passing second, as though the world was holding its breath in grim anticipation of what came next. And then, it arrived. Frrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr across the skies like an approaching storm. The two commanders looked up almost in unison, their faces turning pale as they exchanged one horrified glance. "Fuck," Mickey muttered under his breath, his voice trembling. "Fuck, fuck, fuck. We are so fucked." Anderson's knees almost gave way as the sound grew louder, sharper, closer. "Oh heavens above," he whispered, straightening up suddenly, as his eyes darted upward to the sky where the jet descended like a black streak of death. "Please, Lord Soren, please let me survive today. I haven't even said goodbye to my wife yet." Mickey turned to him, wide-eyed. "You think Lord Shadow Dragon might be in a forgiving mood today?" The question hung unanswered, for by then the shadow of the jet had already fallen over them. The cult flagship rattled faintly as the aircraft roared overhead, its engine scream fading into a low hum as it slowed and hovered above the deck, kicking up a storm of salt and wind. Every soldier on board froze, their weapons lowered, their eyes locked skyward in terror, as the hatch opened, and from within, a solitary figure leapt. Land. Leo descended like a shadow cut from the heavens themselves, landing silently upon the deck despite the height, his boots touching down without a sound. "Gentlemen," he said, as the moment he landed, every man aboard felt it the oppressive weight of an aura so cold and sharp it made their skin crawl and their stomachs twist. The temperature dropped, the seas rippling faintly as though reacting to the tension now pulsing through the air. My lord," Mickey stammered, his forehead already glistening with sweat. We didn't expect you so soon," he said, his voice cracking with nervousness as Leo didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled his hands behind his back and studied the faces of the men around him, who all bowed before him in unison, out of both fear and respect. "So that's the mysterious island. It's got quite the unbelievable mana density, I must say," Leo observed, his eyes moving towards the horizon, as he gazed at the floating island that appeared just a few kilometers away. "That island over there, have any of you tried to reach it?" he asked, his voice calm, as he pointed towards the island. However, Anderson only blinked in response, his mouth suddenly dry as he followed the direction of Leo's finger. The horizon before him looking empty, gray, and endless. "No, my lord," he replied quickly, his voice trembling. "The island, it disappears once you get too close. We cannot see it anymore." Leo turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable, as he gave a small nod. "I see." Then his gaze swept the deck once more, this time not looking at the men aboard the flagship, but rather at the ships surrounding it, as he tried to search for his nephew. "Commander, where is my nephew?" he asked, his tone soft yet threaded with quiet authority, as the question hit both Anderson and Mickey like thunder. Mickey's mouth opened, but no sound came out, while Anderson turned toward him, both men exchanging the same panicked look, as they came up with a delicate way to break the news. "My lord," Mickey finally managed, his voice shaking. "The young lord, he disappeared." "Disappeared," Leo repeated, his tone flat, as that single word carried such weight that even the wind stopped. For a brief instant, silence ruled the world. Then a faint sound, a crack, echoed across the deck as a subtle spike of Leo's aura rippled outward, splitting the wood beneath his feet. Crack, crush. The energy that followed was suffocating, pressing down on the hearts of every man present like an invisible hand. The soldiers collapsed to their knees, some gasping for air, others trembling as though their very souls were trying to flee their bodies. "My lord," Anderson cried, falling forward into a bow so deep his forehead nearly touched the deck. "Please, calm your anger. Please give us a chance to explain." The deck groaned faintly under the strain of Leo's mana, the faint glow of his aura bleeding into the air like heat rising from a forge. And then, as suddenly as it came, the pressure eased. Leo straightened, his eyes steady once more, his breathing controlled. His expression was unreadable, his calm so deliberate that it was almost worse than his rage. He looked at the two commanders, both of whom were still trembling on their knees, and let out a long, measured sigh. "All right," he said quietly. "Explain." Anderson swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet his lord's gaze, though every instinct screamed for him to look away. "My lord," he began, his voice low and uneven, "the young lord insisted on investigating the island. We tried to stop him, but he said that you entrusted him with this expedition for a reason, and that perhaps he could see through what others could not." Leo's brows furrowed faintly, though he said nothing. Anderson continued, his words tumbling over each other. "He took a rowboat with 2 soldiers, and as soon as they crossed the point where the scout ship was stationed, the island disappeared for them. And then, he vanished. Just like that. There was a flash, and then he was gone." Leo closed his eyes briefly, exhaling through his nose as the faintest ripple of power coursed through him again. "So, he disobeyed," he murmured, though there was no anger in his tone, now only something colder, quieter, heavier. Anderson dared not answer. Mickey wiped the sweat from his brow with a shaking hand, his voice barely audible. We searched everywhere, my lord. We sent scouts across the area, but there's nothing. The sea is calm, the sky is clear, there's no damage to the rowboat, no sign of where he went. It's like the world swallowed him whole." Leo's gaze drifted toward the horizon once again, the massive floating island still visible to him, as he let out a deep sigh. "I gave the 2 of you one job," he reprimanded, before leaping from the main ship, as although he couldn't fly, he traversed the distance to the scout ship stationed 5 kilometers ahead in a single leap, which stunned both monarchs watching. Did he just? They wondered, as suddenly, the same flash of light that consumed Leonardo appeared once again, this time for Leo, as he too disappeared from the time-stilled ocean. Chapter 766 Shortcomings. For a long moment after Leo disappeared, neither Anderson nor Mickey spoke. The blinding flash that swallowed Leo had faded, leaving behind only the calm hum of the ocean and the faint sound of static coming from their crystal communicators. "He's gone too," Mickey said as he stared at the spot from where Leo disappeared, his voice trembling between anxiety and relief. Anderson straightened slowly, his own expression caught between relief and dread. Relief that the suffocating pressure of Leo's aura was finally gone, that they could breathe again without their lungs begging for mercy. But the dread came just as swiftly, because if even the Lord himself had vanished into that cursed island, what chance did anyone else have of bringing him back? "Do you realize what this means?" Mickey asked, running a hand through his hair. "We completely failed today as commanders of the cult army. Not only could we not protect a little young boy, but we could not even follow our Lord into whatever challenge he now faces. As future pillars of the cult, we are a disgrace," Mickey said in shame, as Anderson clenched his jaw, staring out toward the horizon that seemed far too still. "Yes," he quietly agreed. "You're right, we haven't even moved out of the time-stilled world yet, and we are so useless, so I can't imagine how weak we will be when facing the righteous faction. Today is a reality check for us. As future pillars of the cult, we definitely need to become more reliable," he said, as the 2 commanders stood there in silence as the wind tugged at their cloaks, guilt sitting heavy on their shoulders. For the first time in years, both men felt like soldiers utterly unworthy of the title they carried. However, what they didn't know was that they were not alone. Now that Leo's pressure was gone, many aboard the ship felt inadequate. Inadequate for not being able to withstand the Lord's pressure, inadequate for not being able to contribute more to these missions than manning a ship, and inadequate for being unable to follow him into danger. As there were many today who resolved to become more reliable, just like Anderson and Mickey. The mysterious floating island, Leo's POV. The light from the ancient teleportation spell soon faded, as Leo found himself inside the mysterious floating island, its vast metallic floor pulsing faintly beneath him. The air was dense with ancient mana, which was an odd phenomenon to feel, since the air inside the time-stilled world was much thicker with mana in and of itself. However, the mana density here was 10 times that of the outer world. He mused, as he looked around slowly, recognizing the curvature of the arches, the sharp symmetry of the columns and the towering structures that seamlessly blended organic grace with impossible scale. It was dragon architecture at its finest. Old, sacred, and long forgotten. His pulse quickened as he placed a palm on the cold surface beside him, feeling a faint thrum and echo of something immense, something alive. Multheric, he whispered, closing his eyes briefly. As the name alone seemed to stir the air. He could feel it now, the faint presence of the ancient beast god woven into every wall, every carved scale, every breath of mana that filled this forgotten sanctum. However, before searching for where exactly the ancient god lay, he first searched for his nephew, as he spread his senses thin using absolute vision. There he is, he thought, as within seconds, he locked onto the faint outline of his nephew's body lying motionless near the base of a colossal pillar, his small frame dwarfed by the sheer scale of the surroundings. Without hesitation, Leo started toward him, his steps steady and silent, gliding across the metallic floor without so much as a whisper. My disobedient nephew, he thought, as he finally reached Leonardo and came to a halt, standing quietly over the boy who lay sprawled upon the softly glowing surface. His chest rose and fell faintly, showing that he was alive, though deeply unconscious. Leo crouched beside him, resting one arm on his knee as his gaze softened. In that quiet instant, the battle-hardened assassin was gone, replaced by the uncle who saw in this boy not just family, but the echoes of a blood connection that refused to fade. He studied Leonardo's face in silence, the same sharp jawline, the same quiet stubbornness, the same faint crease between the brows that once belonged to his father, Jacob. What will I even do with you? Leo whispered, his voice carrying both affection and exasperation. Why did you even come here, boy? What if you died a pointless death? Imagine how that would have made me feel. His eyes dimmed slightly as he exhaled. I would be devastated, just like your parents. He clicked his tongue softly, looking away for a moment as the faint hum of mana surrounded them. He knew Leonardo could not hear him, yet he couldn't stop himself from speaking and releasing the weight of thoughts that had bothered him for the past few minutes. All his life, Leo had been thrown from one crisis to another, as he lived with the constant burden of danger pressing down on him. It was a dog's life, yet, he endured it not for glory, nor for pride, but for them, his family. He fought, bled, and killed so that the next generation would never have to live the same way he did. And yet, here was Leonardo, chasing peril as if destiny itself demanded it. This isn't the life I wanted for you, he murmured, the words barely audible. I want you to chase joy, not problems. He sighed deeply, before reaching forward and pinching Leonardo's cheek lightly. Pinch. The boy's eyes fluttered open instantly, confusion filling them as his senses returned. Huh, he muttered groggily, blinking several times until his uncle's face came into view. Uncle, he said softly, his voice cracking with disbelief and a hint of panic as he saw the stern look waiting for him. Leo said nothing, as he only stared down at the boy with the look of a disapproving elder, causing Leonardo to swallow a mouthful of saliva. Chapter 767 Dangerous but only for you. Leo's paw, the mysterious floating island. Uncle. Leonardo's voice trembled faintly as he blinked, the confusion in his eyes quickly giving way to fear. Leo stood over him, his expression calm but heavy, the weight of disappointment clear in the stillness of his gaze. I told you to wait for me, he said quietly, his voice low yet carrying through the air like a blade, and to stay away from danger. Leonardo's lips parted as if to speak, but the words never came. Yet you disobeyed. Leo continued, his tone reserved and measured, though beneath it simmered an anger he refused to let surface. His aura flickered faintly, restrained but restless. Your very first mission, he said after a pause, and this is what you do. Tell me, boy, how am I supposed to trust you again, Leonardo lowered his head, his gaze falling to the glowing floor beneath his boots. His voice faltered into silence as guilt settled like a weight on his shoulders. I'm sorry, uncle. Save it, Leo interrupted, raising one hand to silence him. Keep your excuses for your mother. I'll be the one telling her about this. The words struck harder than any shout could. Leonardo's heart sank instantly, knowing well how his mother's wrath could eclipse even the fiercest storm. She had always been overprotective, often unreasonably so, and the thought of her finding out made his palms sweat. Leo, seeing the panic flash across his nephew's face, sighed softly before pulling something from his inventory, a small crystalline token that shimmered faintly with layered runes. "Here," he said, holding it out. "A teleportation token. Crush it, and you'll be taken straight back to the flagship." Clutch. Leonardo took it with both hands, the cold surface pressing into his palm. His grip tightened, and though his voice was quiet, it carried a tremor of remorse. "Uncle, before I go, I must warn you, there's something ancient here. Something alive. The aura that hit me, it wasn't normal. It was stronger than anything I've ever felt. Stronger than yours, even." Leo looked at him for a long moment before letting out a quiet, humorless chuckle. "It might be dangerous for you," he said, his tone calm, almost amused, "but not for me." He had barely finished the words when the island itself seemed to awaken again. Groan, tremble, rumble. The metallic ground beneath them vibrated as a low, primal sound rolled through the air, the deep, resonant growl of something impossibly vast stirring from its rest. The faint golden veins running across the platform flared once more, pulsating with violent light as the atmosphere grew thick and hostile, with the air itself beginning to distort. Leonardo stumbled back, clutching the token tightly as a crushing wave of pressure washed over him, the same devastating force that had flattened him before. His breath caught in his throat, his knees weakening as panic flooded his senses. But this time, the weight never touched him. Hum. Leo's aura flared around him, a vibrant red that formed a protective bubble enveloping them both. Within its boundaries, the air grew still again, the violent tremors fading to muffled vibrations. What? Leonardo's eyes widened as he looked up. The same aura that had reduced him to nothing only moments ago now dispersed harmlessly against his uncle's defense, like waves breaking against a cliff. Leo stood firm at the center of it all, unmoving, calm, and utterly in control. "The aura that took me out doesn't even faze him," Leonardo thought in disbelief, his mind struggling to grasp the difference in their strength. He turned to look at Leo's face, expecting strain, but there was none. Only a steady gaze, cold and unwavering, as though the storm raging around them was beneath his notice. Just how strong is Uncle? He wondered, awestruck. But before he could ask, Leo's voice broke through the noise, steady and composed. "Go," he said simply. "You don't belong here yet." Leonardo hesitated for only a second before nodding, swallowing hard as he tightened his grip on the teleportation token. "Understood, Uncle." Crack. With a flash of light, his figure vanished, leaving Leo alone once more upon the trembling island. For a few seconds, he stood still, his cloak rippling under the unseen force as the protective barrier flickered faintly. The air pressed harder now, a weight beyond comprehension. Though Leo's face betrayed nothing, every fiber of his being strained to keep the barrier intact. His aura control was pushed to its absolute limit, the invisible pressure clawing at his body like a living force trying to tear through his defenses. So this is the true might of a god's slumbering will, he thought, his pulse steady even as blood began to trickle from the corner of his lip. Yet even as the crushing force bore down upon him, Leo smiled faintly, not in defiance but in recognition. "I've felt this pressure before," he whispered under his breath. "Back then it was only a projection, a fragment of your true soul, yet this time, I'm meeting the real you. It's been a while, old friend," Leo said, as he began walking towards the source of the aura. As this time, Multheric finally jolted awake from his sleep, as Leo's presence finally gave him enough reason to wake up. "A peculiar human with dragon blood that isn't an ant. Where have I met such an interesting individual before? I'm sure I've seen him somewhere," Multheric thought, as the haze of countless centuries slowly lifted from his mind, the deep fog of sleep giving way to flickers of awareness that pulsed through his colossal form. "Shake." The island responded in kind, trembling faintly as the golden veins across its surface glowed brighter with each heartbeat of its master. Fragments of ancient memory stirred, echoes of battles, the rise and fall of the beast gods, the faces of mortals long gone, until one name surfaced above the rest, clear and deliberate, cutting through the remnants of his slumber. "Leo Skyshard," the beast god murmured inwardly. Is that what the boy was called? Chapter 768 Reunion with Multheric. Leo's Paw, the floating island. With Leonardo gone, Leo turned his focus toward locating the source of Multheric's aura, which seemed to grow stronger with every passing second. He could sense the vague direction from where the aura originated, and hence he walked towards it, his each step growing heavier as the oppressive presence of the ancient beast god pressed down on him. Sweat gathered along his brow, his breath steady but labored, as a faint unease began to coil in his gut the closer he got to the source. Until at last, he arrived before a colossal chamber, its entrance guarded by a towering door etched with glowing runes, beyond which the slumbering deity's power seemed to pulse like a living heartbeat. Here I come, hopefully the bloodthirsty dragon doesn't kill me, Leo thought grimly, his hand pressing against the cold metal surface of the door as he pushed it open and stepped inside. Push. The moment he crossed the threshold, the atmosphere around him shifted. The air grew impossibly dense, folding in on itself as though existence itself hesitated to breathe in the presence of what lay beyond. Every sound dulled, every motion slowed, and for a fleeting instant, Leo felt as though he had stepped into a torture chamber, where millions of souls screamed and howled in pain. What insane killing intent, he mused quietly as his gaze swept across the chamber that seemed to stretch endlessly before him. Carved from the same metallic stone as the rest of the island, it shared the same grand design and intricate craftsmanship, yet there was something different about this place that made it feel aware, almost alive, as if it breathed along with him. It was bright and warm, which meant that his eyes needed a couple seconds to adjust to the brightness inside. However, as they did, the first thing they saw was Moltharak's soul, suspended in the air like a blazing sun, which radiated a power that seemed to hold the entire chamber together. At first, Moltharak's soul appeared as a massive, shifting silhouette, a vague form of flame and shadow, but as Leo approached closer, the haze began to solidify. The light around the silhouette condensed, until eventually it gathered into the magnificent form of a red dragon. His scales burned crimson like molten metal, each one etched with runic symbols that pulsed faintly in time with his aura. Long, curved horns swept back from his head like blades carved from black steel, and a faint shimmer of heat warped the air around his body. His eyes, when they opened, were two blazing orbs of deep gold, filled with the kind of wisdom that only gods having lived for several millennia could possess, as even without a body of flesh, his presence was overwhelming, divine, ancient, and absolute. The sheer pressure radiating from him bent the world around him, causing the ground to ripple as if in reverence. As just gazing upon him, Leo's breathing grew heavier the closer he got. The difference between them was cosmic. Moltharak was not just a creature of strength, but a relic of a forgotten era, a being who had once stood above all beast kings, gods, and creation itself. And yet, despite that, Leo smiled faintly. Stopping a few steps away from the dragon's resting pedestal as he placed one knee on the ground and bowed deeply, his voice calm but sincere. "King Moltharak," he said, the words echoing softly through the chamber. "It's an honor to meet you again." The dragon's great eyes narrowed slightly, as though peering through time itself, before a low rumble escaped his throat, a sound that was equal parts amusement and nostalgia. Leo Skyshard, the beast god's voice reverberated through the chamber, smooth yet thunderous, carrying the weight of eons. Then, his lips curved into what could only be described as a smile. "Or should I say, the boss?" Leo let out a quiet chuckle, his head tilting slightly upward. "I did not expect you to still remember that name," Leo said, as Moltharak let out a deep, rumbling chuckle in return. "How long has it been since I last saw you, peculiar boy with a dragon heart? Since I sleep too often, time has become a blurry concept for me." The dragon mused, his voice echoing faintly across the chamber, as Leo paused for a moment, thinking back carefully before replying. "About 2.5 decades, give or take, so it hasn't been that long," he said at last, as Moltharak lifted his brows in mild surprise. "Only 2.5 decades, and yet you've grown strong enough to stand independently before my true soul fragment. That is quite an achievement," he praised, as Leo bowed slightly, accepting the compliment with quiet humility. However, just as Leo believed that the conversation was going in a positive direction, it suddenly turned for the worse, when Moltharak dropped his next question. "Are you by chance responsible for all the noise that has been going on in my realm lately? I have sensed far too much human activity in these parts that I don't approve of." Moltharak asked, his tone curious yet faintly reproachful, as Leo chuckled awkwardly and nodded, conceding guilt. "Yes, I migrated my people here. It's the only place I could keep them safe." My apologies for disturbing your peace, but I had no other choice. Either I brought them here, or they would have all died pitiful deaths, worse than ones of hunted dogs. Leo clarified, as Multhorak's expression hardened, the glow of his eyes deepening. My prison is not a refuge for your tribe. If you intend to keep them here, you will have to pay an acceptable price. For though I am gracious toward those who share my bloodline like you, and that ant who stumbled onto this island, I have little patience for unrelated humans who hold no meaning to me. So, if you wish to keep them here, you must offer fair payment. He demanded, as Leo's face grew still at the sudden demand, his mind briefly blank. This was not how he had envisioned his reunion with Multhorak beginning, yet now that it had taken this turn, he had no choice but to listen. All right, he said after a moment, his tone steady. What, then, would you consider an acceptable price? He asked, as Multhorak's lips curved into a slow, knowing grin. Chapter 769 Factors Affecting Aura. The mysterious floating island, Leo's POV. The chamber pulsed softly with heat as Multhorak shifted his massive soul form, the glow of his scales dimming and brightening in rhythm. For a few seconds, he simply stared at Leo, silent and unreadable, before finally speaking. My tribe, the dragons, I'm sure they still live in some corner of the universe. Not all of them will possess the mana heart, as even in the ancient times, only the dragons with the best genetics used to have it. However, if you can safely nurture humans here, I'm sure you can do the same for dragons. So my request is simple. Find my people, and invite them to live here as well, so that I can oversee their development, and become a beast king once more. Multhorak asked, as Leo raised an eyebrow at the demand. There did exist a few planets across the universe still inhabited by mythical beasts, but their numbers were nothing compared to the countless worlds ruled by humans. From what Leo knew, only 4 planets remained with a significant dragon population, each fiercely protective of its own kind. Which was why, finding one and convincing its inhabitants to leave was going to be extremely complicated. Your request is difficult, but not impossible. I can attempt to complete it within this century, but if I am to succeed, I will need your assistance as well. Leo said, his tone calm and deliberate, as Multhorak nodded slowly, the faint glow of his eyes softening in approval. That is only natural. If you accept this task, I shall lend you my knowledge in return. Tell me, young human, what secrets do you seek from me? I will indulge your curiosity for as long as you wish. Multhorak encouraged, as Leo let out a quiet sigh, the sharp glint in his gray eyes returning. Aura, he began, his tone thoughtful. Tell me more about it, especially what determines its strength. Lately, I feel as though there is a key ingredient missing from my training. Your aura control is already remarkable, and I can see you have begun walking the king's path, Multhorak replied, but before he could continue, Leo interrupted. You mean the emperor's path? He asked, raising a brow, as Multhorak chuckled softly and shook his head. King's path, at least that's what we called it in the old days. Perhaps you modern humans decided to make it sound more glamorous. Leo gave a faint nod, gesturing for him to go on. At your stage, there are 4 key factors that influence the strength of aura, Multhorak explained. The first is control. This refers to your ability to express your aura precisely as you wish. The greater your control, the more lethal your aura becomes. You are already doing well in this regard, since you can mold your aura into both a shield and a weapon. That alone proves your grasp over its flow. Leo listened carefully, his full attention fixed on the ancient dragon. The second factor is the cultivation tier, Multhorak continued. The stronger your cultivation, the stronger your soul becomes, and since aura originates from the soul, the two grow in tandem. A golden core cultivator's soul will always have limits that a nascent soul cultivator can surpass. Therefore, the higher your tier, the more potent your aura. Leo's eyes narrowed slightly as he translated the ancient phrasing into modern understanding. Multhorak was referring to ascension from the transcendent stage to monarch, and how tiering up was beneficial for increasing soul strength. The third factor, Multhorak went on, is karma. Your deeds cling to your soul and give it scent and weight. Become a tyrant like me, who has slaughtered billions for pleasure, and your karma will steep your soul in bloodlust. That accumulated karma strengthens your killing intent, making it sharper and heavier than that of an opponent who has never killed. It has nothing to do with training, yet it impacts your aura's strength greatly. No god you ever come across will ever be a saint. For their aura to have any legitimacy, they must have slaughtered billions. It is unjust, yet it remains true. The more you kill, the stronger your killing intent becomes, and so far this is where you lack. Your soul is clean compared to the aura you wield, and it can grow a lot stronger if you start to slaughter indiscriminately. But karma does not only feed hatred. The same rule applies to joy, love, and compassion. Spread joy throughout the cosmos, and your good karma will make your aura radiant and serene. So in essence, your past deeds shape the nature and potency of your aura, but as a warrior, the only karma you should care about is lives. Claimed. Leo nodded slowly, absorbing every word with deep focus. And lastly, Multharic said, his tone deepening, aura is shaped by emotion. Emotion acts as both amplifier and suppressor, for they can elevate your aura to divine heights or cripple it entirely. Combine anger with killing intent and its ferocity multiplies, but temper it with joy, and its edge dulls. Maintaining the correct emotional state is as vital for aura mastery as control itself, and hence to command aura perfectly, you must first master emotion. Multharic concluded, as Leo stood quietly before him, his expression thoughtful and composed. Every word the dragon had spoken resonated deeply within him, revealing truths that no manual or master had ever taught. He could feel new understanding settle into place, as though the fragmented pieces of his training were finally aligning. So you're saying that the reason behind why I'm not able to keep my aura in control is because my emotional state is not stable? Leo asked, as Multharic nodded in agreement. You are mastering aura without mastering emotions. There is a bubbling anger within you that refuses to fade away, yet instead of accepting it and processing it like an adult, you're trying to forcibly pin it down like a child. The more you suppress it, the more it will leak out of you. For aura and emotions are related. What you need to do instead is learn how to channel it, and wield it as a weapon, for it's not your aura control that's lacking, but rather the anger you feel is too strong. Multharic explained, as Leo finally understood as to why his aura kept leaking out of his body against his will. Chapter 770 An Outrageous Promise. All this time I kept thinking my control over aura was lacking when in reality it was my control over emotions that was the problem. Leo said quietly, disappointment weighing on his voice as Multharac's golden eyes softened slightly. There was something about Leo that reminded the ancient dragon of the rarest kind of mortal, the kind worth remembering, which was why he treated him with a gentleness usually reserved only for his long-lost queens. Do not be so disappointed, for someone of your cultivation tier your power is already extraordinary. If this were the primordial era and you belonged to one of my rival clans, I would have sought you out myself just to end you before you became a threat. Multharic said with a faint smile, his voice carrying both amusement and pride, as Leo chuckled softly at the remark, though the sound faded quickly into quiet reflection. The universe had evolved beyond recognition since Multharac's reign. Yet Leo wasn't sure whether that evolution had truly been for the better. For even today, rival prodigies remained a target for jealous factions in power. Do you miss it? Leo asked eventually, his voice melancholic. Having a body, waging wars, feeling the weight of victory and defeat, or are you content with having an indestructible soul and being trapped here for eternity? He asked, as Multharic turned his gaze away, the molten light of his body flickering faintly as he pondered about the question for a while, before turning to look towards Leo again. Yes, I miss it, every moment of it. If given the chance I would start over from the lowest tier without hesitation. I miss the thrill of battle, the rush of chaos, the feeling of being alive, but with my soul bound here and no living god foolish enough to step into this realm, this fate is one I will likely endure forever. He said, as his words carried the weight of endless time, calm on the surface yet hollow within, as Leo could feel the centuries of solitude pressing behind that steady tone. What if, Leo began, his eyes narrowing slightly, a god was foolish enough to enter this realm, what would happen then? He asked in an oddly conspiring voice, as Multharic tilted his head and then let out a booming laugh that echoed through the chamber. Na. If a living god ever wandered into this place, he repeated, amusement lacing his voice, then I would seize the opportunity to wrest control of his body, for the only vessel that can contain the power of a divine soul is a divine body. He began, as the shine of his golden eyes became brighter. If such a god were to appear, even for a moment, I would merge with his vessel, and from that instant a dangerous game would begin. His body would not be strong enough to bear the weight of two divine souls, and hence it would begin to collapse under its own power, melting from within as divine wounds tore through it faster than his divinity could heal. At which point, only two outcomes will be possible. First, the host abandons his body, becoming a wandering soul like me. Or second, where he fights me for control until the end, in which case both of our souls risk destruction. Either way, it is not a battle I would lose, for unlike any living god, I no longer fear death, in fact I would welcome it. If I perish, I shall finally find peace, or if he runs away, I will finally live again. But either way, I will not come out of that scenario a loser. Multharic concluded, his deep voice steady and absolute, as Leo nodded slowly, the gravity of the dragon's words sinking deep into his mind. So, if hypothetically, I help you gain a new body, how will you repay that debt? Will you lend me your power for my cause? Or will you forget all about me, and treat me like an ant? Leo asked, as Multharac's expression turned serious. He looked straight into Leo's eyes as if gauging as to what the young boy was planning as he felt his non-existent heart clench at this moment. Just what are you planning here, boy? For the golden intent threads around us are increasing every passing second. Multharic asked, as Leo looked at them too, his expression unchanged even though he felt surprised as well. Never before in his entire life had he seen more golden intent threads gather around him, as at this moment, there were more than 100 around him. Most of them connected him to Multharic, while a few shot up straight into the cosmos. This could be a turning point in history, old friend. Your decision here can either bring us both prosperity, or doom. But the ball is in your court now, Leo said, as suddenly another 50 golden intent lines appeared, making both him and Multharic shudder. Na, na 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 na. The ancient red dragon laughed, as he couldn't believe that after living for over 5,000 years, a simple interaction with a mortal would bring him so much joy. However, the fact that it did, made him feel more reckless than he would usually have been. Let's say you manage to bring a living god here, and that I do manage to take over his body. Then from that moment onwards, I solemnly swear that I, King Multharic, will owe you a lifelong debt of gratitude. For as long as I live, I will live as your ally and come to your aid when you call. Your enemies will become my enemies, while my friends will become your worshippers. If this red dragon ever walks the cosmos again, he will be both your sword and shield. And he will ensure that you walk your path to divinity with minimal complications. Multharic said, a giant smile forming on his face, as Leo grinned right back. He knew there was no need to formalize his promise with a contract, for Multharac's words were as good as a binding contract, as that was the character of this simple yet magnificent beast. Chapter 771. A ridiculous request. After Multharic vowed to owe Leo a lifelong debt of gratitude should he ever grant him a new body, the chamber fell into a heavy silence once more, the golden intent threads still shimmering faintly around them, as they slowly began to fade one after another. Leo remained still, his gaze fixed upon Multharac's radiant form, as the red glow around the dragon's body burned a brighter shade of crimson. For a while, neither spoke. The promise they had just forged lingering between them, weighty and unspoken, as they both took a moment to digest its enormity. Then, Leo exhaled softly, his expression shifting from satisfaction to quiet concern. There's something else I need your help with. The subject this time is tricky and will probably need some ingenious solution on your part. Leo said, his voice low yet resolute, as Multharic tilted his head slightly, his massive soul form stirring like a slow tide, as curiosity returned to his golden eyes. I hope it's not advice on how to lure a god here. For if I knew how to do that, I wouldn't be stuck here for so long. Multharic joked, as Leo's lips curved faintly, though the seriousness in his eyes betrayed no humor. My brother was captured by the righteous faction recently. And word is that they're holding him hostage. And to make matters worse, I have no idea as to where exactly he's being held. Leo began, as his expression turned more and more sour after every line he spoke, the anger visible in his eyes. What I do know though is where his execution will take place. And it's a place called the Pit. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's apparently the home world of a god called Helmuth. He's a tough guy of sorts, and there's a chance that he, and a few other gods might be in attendance for this execution. Leo explained, as Multhorak's eyes widened in disbelief the longer Leo spoke. So, what I need your advice on is how to save him. For the plans that I have come up with so far are pretty useless. Leo admitted, as for a couple seconds Multhorak just blinked blankly as if waiting for the punchline of this joke to arrive, however, it never did. What? Are you actually serious? Multhorak asked, as Leo nodded, his expression as serious as it could be, as Multhorak immediately burst out laughing. Na-na-na-na-na. Multhorak's laughter roared through the chamber, echoing off the walls like rolling thunder, as it shook the very air around them. So let me get this straight, he began, his voice dripping with disbelief as his massive form trembled from amusement. So your brother was taken away, and you don't even know where he's being kept, he said, snickering as his laughter began to build again. The execution is going to take place on a god's home world, he continued, his tone rising with each absurd detail as he struggled to contain his amusement. And there will be several gods in attendance, yet you still hope to save him. By the time he finished, he was howling with laughter, his deep, booming voice shaking the chamber as the molten streams of light across his scales flared and dimmed in rhythm with his uncontrollable amusement. Ha ha ha, oh, you truly are something else, Leo Skyshard, Multhorak said between fits of laughter, wiping away a tear that wasn't there, his tail coiling in delight. But through it all, Leo simply stood there, silent, unmoved, his eyes calm and unflinching. He waited patiently, his expression betraying not a shred of embarrassment or frustration, only resolve. Gradually, Multhorak's laughter slowed, fading into a deep sigh as the echo of his mirth died in the molten air. It can't be done, boy, he said finally, the humor draining from his voice. Give it up. He lowered his head slightly, his golden eyes narrowing in something closer to pity than mockery. Although I admire your spirit as a brother, truly, I do, this is not a battle you can win. If I were in your place, perhaps I'd feel the same desperation, the same need to try. But that doesn't change the truth. He leaned closer, his immense form casting a shadow over Leo as his tone hardened. This fight is far above your league. We are talking about gods here, several of them. While you are not even a nascent soul cultivator. At some point, you must accept your limits. Leo nodded, his expression still perfectly calm. All right, he said quietly, I acknowledge my limits. Then, meeting the dragon's gaze squarely, his next words came out. Firm, steady, and without hesitation. So now tell me, what's the bare minimum I would need to make this happen? Leo demanded, as the faint amusement vanished from Multhorak's eyes completely, being instead replaced by a genuine respect as he realized that Leo was dead set on making this happen. All right boy. For starters you will need a god as your ally. One as strong as your ancestor the timeless assassin. For only a god of that caliber can guarantee the safety of you puny mortals behind him. Multhorak began, as he waited for Leo to confirm that he could enlist the help of such an individual. For if not for this key personnel, the rest of the plan would become pretty much pointless anyways. However, to his surprise, Leo nodded confidently at this demand, as he said, although I can't enlist the help of the timeless assassin, I think I can convince his son, Soren, to help us. After all, I'm only the temporary sect master of the cult, while he is the real one, Leo assured, as Multhorak raised a surprised eyebrow to his words. Multhorak had thrown that first condition out there rather jokingly, as he did not expect Leo to have the ability to enlist the help of such a god. However, the fact that Leo could, now made this plan go from absolutely impossible to just nearly impossible. As a chance to save his brother, however small, was finally created. Chapter 772 Way Forward. Leo's Paw, the mysterious floating island. In that case, Multhorak began, his deep, rumbling voice echoing softly through the chamber, there might be some hope for you to save your friend after all. Leo's eyes lifted at once, a flicker of cautious optimism stirring in their gray depths, as he waited for the dragon to elaborate. If all the gods are taken out of the equation, Multhorak continued, his tone more deliberate now, then the only major threats you'll have to deal with are the kings and nascent soul cultivators. Leo nodded slowly, mentally translating the ancient terminology into modern terms, aka demigods and monarchs, the kinds of opponents that will be his headache to face. The kings will be your biggest problem, Multheric said after a pause, his voice deepening as though reliving memories buried under centuries of war. They are capable of perceiving the fourth dimension and sensing ruptures in space and time. If they lock onto you, they can chase you across the stars, at speeds your golden core body could never hope to match. He exhaled softly, his great tail curling around him as he tapped his chin thoughtfully with its tip. Boy, he said suddenly, do you know how we used to travel through space in the old days before spaceships and slow space travel was invented? He asked, as Leo shook his head in denial, showcasing his lack of knowledge about the subject. Well, it's been such a long time, it's natural that the knowledge of those times has started to become lost. Multheric continued, his golden eyes glowing brighter now as nostalgia flickered across its vast, ethereal form. Back then, we used to travel between worlds by creating a spatial disturbance known as a space tunnel. It was an extraordinarily dangerous method of travel, for the tunnel could collapse upon itself at any moment, crushing everything within to nothingness. Countless soldiers lost their lives in those early attempts to cross its unstable passage, yet even as safer and more refined modes of space travel emerged, space tunneling remained, until the very end of my era, the fastest means of journeying between any 2 points in the universe. He paused briefly, his tone softening into something that almost resembled pride. Even today, I doubt there exists a faster way. For in a stable space tunnel, even mortals such as yourself could move at speeds equal to that of a king. Leo's brows furrowed slightly, his heart thudding once as he processed the words. So you're saying, he murmured, that if I could somehow replicate that technique, I could escape from the pit, at speeds difficult for the enemy to chase me at? Leo asked, as precisely. Multheric replied, his voice carrying a faint note of satisfaction. If you acquire the knowledge of space tunneling, you will be able to move yourself and your army in and out of any battlefield at speeds impossible for your enemy to chase you at. For unless they are kings themselves, or gods, I doubt there exists a conventional travel method that can replicate the same speed. Multheric boasted, as a vision began to form in Leo's mind. Not everyone can create a space tunnel, and even for you to learn how to make one, you will have to reach the nascent soul stage at the least, after which, I will embed inside you a very tiny fragment of my soul, which will act as the medium for this technique. Multheric explained patiently, as Leo immediately understood that this was no ordinary technique that just anyone could hope to master. Yet if he could somehow grasp it, this knowledge alone could solve one of his greatest problems, which was to find a way to escape the pit alive. For if a secure retreat was ensured, then the only challenge that remained was reaching his brother and bringing him back in one piece. Do you know, boy, Multheric said after a pause, his golden gaze studying Leo intently, how gods themselves travel through the fourth dimension? Again, Leo shook his head, silently urging him to continue. In essence, Multheric began, a god can move from one end of the universe to another in an instant, if he so wishes. Yet in practice, they rarely do so, for the mana cost is astronomical. You see, even a god runs out of energy midway through such a leap. For them, teleporting a few million miles at a time is effortless like flicking a finger, but that is their limit. After that, they are drained, and even though they can replenish mana rapidly from the surrounding void, it still takes them a minute or two before they can make the next jump. Leo's mind absorbed every word, carefully mapping out the difference between divine movement and what Multheric had described earlier. Conversely, Multheric continued, kings, who cannot yet manipulate the fourth dimension, traverse the void by creating a phenomenon called space tunneling. They use their mana to press against the boundaries of the third dimension, creating a temporary distortion, a narrow corridor of sorts that runs through the folds of space. And within that tunnel, every step they take equals 1,000 miles. Outside it. So while it is not true teleportation, it is still close enough to rival it and faster than any other mode of conventional travel, for if you start sprinting within that tunnel, you're essentially blitzing through space at unprecedented speeds. He smiled faintly, the flickering crimson light dancing across his form. That was how we used to travel, back when strength and will alone decided who ruled the stars. Leo crossed his arms, his expression contemplative, already imagining the logistics behind such a feat. So, what you're saying is, with this technique, I can outrun everyone below the king level? Leo asked, as Multheric nodded in confirmation. In theory, yes. But in practice, your current body will not be able to endure the mana pressure that comes with sustaining a stable tunnel. The load will rip through your circuits long before you finish the jump. Which is why you must tear up and become a nascent soul, and then store up on fast-absorbing mana stones, which can help you sustain the load for the strenuous journey. While my soul fragment can help you push the boundaries of the third dimension and create that tunnel, only you can power and sustain it, which is why your mana circuits will need to be elastic and in perfect condition for you to pull this off. Multheric explained, as Leo finally understood the full picture. I see, he muttered as his eyes began to gleam with a renewed resolve, the earlier heaviness in his chest replaced by a spark of purpose. Once again, the ancient dragon had given him what he needed the most, which was a way forward where there had been none. Chapter 773 The Coming 7 Years. Leo's Paw, the mysterious floating island. After speaking with Multheric a while longer and uncovering the floating island's secret, that an ancient spell guarded it and allowed only those of Multherac's bloodline to set foot upon its surface, Leo finally turned to leave, his mind weighed down by thoughts that refused to settle. Multheric had informed him that it would take him at least 1 or 2 years to master the technique of space tunneling, a feat so difficult that even among the dragon race, it had been reserved for only the most gifted. And as if learning the technique in itself was not daunting enough, what truly burdened Leo's mind was not the difficulty of the task, but the unforgiving timeline that came with it. If he truly wished to attempt Ver's rescue, then he had at most 7 years before having to leave the time-stilled world, as he needed to spend at least a month in the outside world to contact Soren and finalize the rescue plan, with all the facts at hand. Right now, my priority should be completing my mastery over the Emperor Suppression Manual and breaking into the Monarch tier. I need to do it as soon as possible, but I also can't risk starting over from nothing. If I lose my streak now, it would be akin to losing my chance to save Ver. Leo thought, as he felt immense pressure about the coming future. He could not afford any mistakes now. For making one would not only set his own progress back by years, but would also be a death sentence for Ver. Apart from that, I also need to find a way to regulate my emotions. For if regulating them is the root cause behind my aura leaking, then I must learn how to fix it so that I can be with my kids and family. Leo concluded as he crushed the teleportation token in his hands and returned back to the flagship. The Timeless Ocean, the Cult Fleet. Leonardo stood aboard the flagship, his shoulders sunken and his gaze lowered, as he twiddled with his thumbs like a toddler. Beside him were Commander Anderson and Commander Mickey James, both men standing tall and silent, their stern expressions betraying the quiet disapproval they held for his earlier recklessness. Neither of them said a word, yet their stillness alone was enough to make Leonardo shrink further into himself. Waves crashing. The faint sound of the waves lapping against the hull filled the air, mingling with the sharp scent of salt carried by the wind, as the flagship shifted slightly from side to side amidst the timeless ocean. Will Uncle be all right? Leonardo thought, guilt tightening his chest. That insane pressure. What if Uncle can't handle it? He wondered, as his stomach folded inwards in fear. Although Leo had assured him that he would be fine, Leonardo couldn't help but wonder about the off chance that he was not. But what can I even do? It's not like the commanders will listen to what I have to say. He thought helplessly, as he looked to his right where Commander Anderson stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable, while Commander James leaned slightly against the railing behind him, his sharp eyes fixed on the horizon. Both seemed far too calm for Leonardo's liking, as though they had long grown used to waiting for Leo to come back from dangerous situations that nobody else could interfere in. Leonardo's nerves, however, frayed with each passing second. His fingers tapped anxiously against his palm as his lips parted hesitantly. Commander Anderson, maybe we should. He began, but before he could finish, the air around them rippled violently. A low hum filled the deck as the space at its center twisted and bent like heated glass, glowing faintly with white light before collapsing inward with a soft crack. And from that distortion stepped Leo. He appeared perfectly composed, his robe flowing lightly in the sea breeze, his expression calm and unreadable, as though the crushing divine pressure of Multherac's realm had never even touched him. Uncle, you're back, Leonardo said at once, his relief evident as his eyes brightened and his voice trembled slightly. Leo glanced toward him briefly before his gaze swept across the deck, where every crew member had already straightened and saluted in unison. My lord, Commander Anderson spoke, his voice even yet edged with curiosity. I hope you found what you were seeking. Anderson said respectfully, as Leo gave him a faint nod, his joy evident by how faint his aura had become now as compared to when he first arrived here. Yes, this expedition has been a resounding success. Leo replied. As for a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, one by one, the crew let out sighs of relief. Some smiled faintly, while others whispered prayers of gratitude under their breath. Across the deck, the tension dissolved like mist in the morning sun, as the air filled once more with the faint sound of the ocean waves. Resounding success, Commander James repeated softly, a big smile plastered on his face, as he gave Anderson a playful shoulder tap. Good work, everyone. You've all done well, Leo complimented, his tone steady but sincere, as he gave the crew members and the commanders a rare smile and a thumbs up of approval. Ha ha ha. This is the greatest day of my life. We love you, Lord Shadow Dragon. The crew shouted in response, their hearts lighter now, as they took pride in knowing that they had been of help to the Shadow Dragon. Have a safe journey back. I will take my troublemaking nephew back with me in the jet, so that he doesn't bother you anymore. Leo instructed Anderson, who gave a curt nod in response. Safe journey to you as well, my lord. I will see you back in Skyshard City, he said, as in the next second, Leo wrapped his hand around Leonardo's waist and jumped off the deck and into the waiting jet. Above. Chapter 774. A lamb fattened for slaughter. Meanwhile, Ver's Paw, the Eternal Garden. The Eternal Garden shimmered in quiet perfection, its sprawling meadows gleaming beneath a sky so vividly blue it almost hurt to look at. The air carried the faint perfume of moonshine flowers and dew-soaked leaves, while the whisper of an unseen stream sang softly somewhere in the distance. Ver lay upon the cool grass, his arms tucked behind his head, eyes half-lidded as he stared up at the drifting clouds. Peace was supposed to be comforting, yet in this place, it only gave his thoughts room to stir. Should I cooperate with him? He wondered, his gaze following a lone feather spiraling through the breeze. Raymond seems willing to betray his father, but I just don't buy it. My instincts tell me that there is more to his offer than what meets the eye. However, if I outright refuse to play his game, I'll never find out what that missing piece is. He thought, as he sighed softly and recalled their earlier encounter. Raymond's demeanor had been edgy back then, his tone almost panicky, while his choice of words seemed like he was genuinely scared to do this as well. There was desperation in his gaze, perhaps even determination, but Ver did not see an ounce of betrayal. He wants something, Ver thought, pressing his thumb against the grass. Something beyond the simple skill exchange. He's just not telling me what, yet. The grass rustled faintly beneath him as he sat up, his expression thoughtful, eyes reflecting the gentle azure of the sky above. Yet, despite his doubts, a small part of him considered the offer. Perhaps Raymond was indeed willing to betray his father. Perhaps he was desperate enough to trade loyalty for power. Maybe I should test him, he thought, his lips curling faintly. Teach him one of the lesser techniques, perhaps. See how he reacts. If he keeps his promise, that will speak volumes. If he breaks it, I will know exactly what kind of man he is. He thought as he leaned forward, plucking a single blade of grass between his fingers as the idea formed more clearly in his head. Shapeshift could do, he mused. It is dangerous but manageable, a technique that can expose his true motives without risking much. He doesn't need to know that I lack mastery over all 15 forbidden methods, nor that I will ever teach him more than 2. But if I give him one and then observe him closely, I can then learn more about his true intentions than any words could hope to reveal. He concluded, as he laid back down on the grass again, his mind already made on how to approach this problem. Meanwhile, inside Calith's tea pavilion, another corner of the Eternal Garden. Far across the garden, where the sunlight poured through crystalline branches and reflected upon ivory stones, Calith sat opposite his son at a polished jade table. The air was filled with the fragrant steam of freshly brewed tea, its golden hue shimmering within delicate porcelain cups. You think he will fall for it, father? Raymond asked at last, his tone measured, his sharp eyes fixed upon the man sitting across from him. Calith smiled faintly, his gaze resting upon the rippling tea as he stirred it slowly with an ornate silver spoon. Yes, he said softly, his voice smooth, unhurried, almost regal. I think he will. They always do. Raymond tilted his head slightly, curiosity flickering in his eyes as Caliph continued. The dragons of the cult have all shared the same personality throughout history. They believe themselves chosen, destined, touched by fate. And when something too good to be true presents itself, they don't question it. They believe it is the universe rewarding them for their struggle. He paused briefly to take a sip, savoring the taste as his smile widened by a fraction. He will play along, at least for a while. Perhaps he'll hesitate, perhaps he'll doubt you at first, but he'll come around. Pride is a dangerous weakness, my son, and even the wisest of them cannot see when it blinds them. Raymond set his cup down gently, his fingers tracing its rim as a thoughtful silence followed. So, you truly think he will reveal some of the forbidden methods? In time, Caliph replied. First he'll test you, then he'll decide to test himself. He'll give you a small piece of what he knows to gauge your reaction. But once he does, once that line is crossed, it will only be a matter of time before he gives away more. That is how trust works for men like him. They mistake curiosity for control. Raymond nodded slowly, his expression serious now. At first, when Caliph had insisted that they be the ones to oversee Vare's confinement, Raymond hadn't understood why. The Eternal Garden was not a prison, and usually Caliph never allowed mortals to reside in here for too long. However, as the plan unfolded, he finally began to see the threads connecting each step. You never intended to keep him here just for observation, did you? Raymond asked quietly as Caliph chuckled and leaned back in his chair as his eyes gleamed with a dangerous calm. Observation is the polite word for it, yes. But no, my true intention was far more practical. I wanted him here so that you could study him up close and entice him. Make him trust you. And in doing so, make him reveal the cult's forbidden arts. Raymond's brows furrowed slightly. But I thought you already knew. All 15 of them. After all, before Uncle Soren, it was you who was being prepared to become the next sect master of the cult, no? Raymond asked, as Caliph's laughter echoed softly, carrying with it a hint of bitterness. Yes, I was. But that was 2,000 years ago. My father created the original 15 techniques, but who's to say my brother hasn't forged new ones since then? Time changes even gods, my son, and my brother has always been inventive. If I am to face him in the battle that awaits us, I cannot afford to be caught unprepared. He swirled the tea once more, his reflection shimmering faintly on the liquid surface. The forbidden methods were once our family's legacy, but they could have evolved, just as he could have. I need to know if new ones exist, and if they do, I need to know how. They work before the war begins. Raymond leaned forward slightly, the weight of his father's words settling in his chest. So that's your real goal behind confining him here, I see it now. Caliph smiled faintly, his gaze lifting from his cup to meet his son's. Bringing him here, healing his wounds, giving him the freedom to move around. It's all a part of my plan. To be brutally honest, I could not care less if he were roaming the Eternal Garden naked, or went hungry for a month. However, I gave him back his dignity, his respect, his freedom, just to give him the illusion that he's in control here. For hope, my son, is a dangerous force all in itself. If we let him believe he is testing you, let him think he is in control. In the end, he will teach you everything he seeks to protect, and when that time comes, we will have already won. Caliph thought, as Raymond finally realized just how terrifying his father was behind his outwardly noble demeanor. Chapter 775 Leo's Children. The Skyshard Residence, Amanda's POV. Giggles. Childish laughter. Artificial sunlight streamed softly through the crystal-paneled windows of the Skyshard residence, scattering golden specks of warmth across the marble floor as laughter echoed faintly through the room. The Skyshard residence, usually quiet and dignified, felt alive this afternoon, its silence broken by the playful shrieks of two little boys tumbling across the velvet carpet. Caleb, the elder of the two, stood triumphantly atop a pile of cushions, his dark hair tousled while his gray eyes, so unmistakably like his father's, gleamed with mischief. Below him sat little Myron, only 2 years old, his brown curls bouncing as he clapped his tiny hands together, while a grin stretched on his tiny face from ear to ear. His eyes, the same soft brown as Amanda's, sparkled with delight, though his nose and that cheeky smile bore the mark of his father. Mother, please tell us the story of Father and Grandpa Ben," Caleb demanded, puffing his chest proudly as though he were about to lead an army. Amanda, seated nearby on a plush chair with a book in hand, looked up with an indulgent sigh. Again. Caleb, sweetheart, you've heard that story more times than I can count. How about I tell you a new story today? The story of how your mama used to make rice cakes back on Earth. No, I don't want to hear that, I want to hear about Father and Grandpa Ben. He insisted, tugging gently at her dress, while Myron, barely understanding the conversation, simply echoed with a cheerful, "Please mama, dada." Amanda shook her head with a helpless smile, closing her book and setting it aside. "Oh, you too," she murmured, pretending to think for a moment before giving in. "All right then, but only because my two brave warriors asked so nicely." "Yay!" both boys exclaimed in unison, clapping their hands and bouncing with excitement. Amanda chuckled and reached forward, gathering them both into her lap as the sunlight from the artificial lamps installed outside the windows bathed them in a warm glow. She brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, her voice softening into a familiar, melodic tone that made even ordinary words sound magical. "Once upon a time," she began, "when your father was a young boy just like you, Caleb, he lived deep inside a great jungle with Grandpa Ben." "Was it scary?" Caleb whispered, eyes wide. "Oh, very scary," Amanda said with mock seriousness, wiggling her fingers as if summoning the spirits of the forest. The trees were so tall that even the sky couldn't see past them, and at night, the forest spirits would whisper secrets only the brave could hear. "Boo!" Myron shouted suddenly, throwing his tiny arms up. "Gasp!" Amanda gasped playfully, clutching her heart. "Oh dear, it's the forest spirit," she said dramatically, and both boys burst into giggles as she tickled them mercilessly, their laughter filling the room. Once the laughter subsided, she continued, her tone gentle again. "In that jungle, there lived a big bad group of mountain lions," she said, lowering her voice to a whisper, "and they troubled all the other animals. The deer were too scared to drink water, the rabbits hid in their burrows all day, and even the monkeys stopped swinging from the trees." "What happened next?" Caleb asked, leaning forward with wide-eyed curiosity, even though he knew exactly what came next. "Well," Amanda said, smiling softly, "one day, all the animals gathered and went to your father. They begged him to help, because they knew he was the only one brave enough to stand up to the mountain lions." "And did he?" "Oh yes," she said, nodding proudly. "He stood tall, just like you do now, Caleb, and said, 'Don't be afraid. I'll protect the jungle.' Then he went into the heart of the forest, where the mountain lions lived." "Rah-rah-rah-rah," Myron roared, baring his tiny teeth as Amanda laughed. "That's right, Myron. The lions went, roar," she said, pretending to cower, "but your father wasn't scared at all. He fought bravely with his dagger in hand and sent them all running far, far away." "Phew. Pow. Shing," Caleb added enthusiastically, swinging an imaginary dagger through the air as Myron followed with a delighted, "Bam." Amanda giggled, hugging them both close. "Exactly like that," she said warmly. "And from that day on, all the animals in the jungle called your father their protector. They built a little throne for him made of vines and flowers and crowned him their guardian. The squirrels would bring him nuts and berries, the monkeys would bring him fruits, while the deer brought him flowers. And then they lived happily ever after." For a moment, the story hung in the air like a dream, wrapping the room in soft nostalgia and warmth. Amanda looked down at her sons, and saw Caleb's face to be full of pride, while Myron's being one of wonder, as she felt her heart swell. With a bittersweet joy, she wished Leo could have been here to see this. That he could enjoy watching the kids grow up like she did. However, the fact that he couldn't be here remained a bitter pill that she was forced to swallow, for she knew the dangers that came with inviting him home with that unstable aura. "When I grow up," Caleb said suddenly, puffing up his chest again, "I'll become just like father." Amanda smiled, brushing a small tear forming in the corner of her eyes aside, as she said, "You already have his courage, my love." "And I, Mama," Myron began, stumbling adorably over his words as Amanda leaned closer to hear. I, Mama," he declared proudly, throwing his arms around her neck, as he tried to convey that he wanted to be just like his mother. "Ha ha ha." Amanda laughed, hugging him tightly as Caleb joined in, wrapping his small arms around them both. The three of them stayed like that for a while, their laughter mingling. with the sound of the distant breeze, the artificial sunlight dancing over their faces. And for that fleeting, perfect moment, the Skyshard residence, home of the Lord of the Land, felt like the simplest and happiest place in the universe. Just like the home of every child was supposed to be. Chapter 776 Preparations begin. Meanwhile, Chaosbringer. Ever since the enemy had first breached the time-stilled world to deliver the tapes, Chaosbringer found his nights stripped of peace, as sleep no longer came easily to a man who no longer felt safe within his own dominion. It was not his immediate safety within the time-stilled world that troubled him, but rather the unsettling thought that the enemy might one day blockade its exit and trap them within their own sanctuary that did. If the righteous faction had found a way in, it meant they could just as easily find a way to set up an ambush just outside the gate. However, to his surprise, they made no such moves. What's their play here? Just why would they not set up an ambush outside the time-stilled world? Did they want to draw us out? Did they want us to leave our safe haven inside? But why? Wouldn't they be better off containing us inside? He wondered, as the questions gnawed at him with every passing night, festering like an open wound. For the first time in his life, Chaosbringer found himself unable to grasp the enemy's strategy. The unknown man behind their movements, the true shot caller of the righteous faction, was unlike anyone he had ever faced before. He was not logical, not predictable, not driven by the ordinary ambitions of conquest or pride. There was a madness to his method, a kind of cruelty that thrived on confusion and fear. He's insane, Chaosbringer thought bitterly. Likely a monster wearing a scholar's skin. He doesn't want to win through power, he wants to win by breaking our will. The thought sent a chill crawling down his spine, and for a long while, he simply stood by the wooden table, his fingers tracing the edges of the map, his eyes fixed on the glowing outline of the wider universe. And now, the Lord wants to leave this place, he muttered under his breath, his jaw tightening. To the cult commoners, Leo's decision to rescue Ver would seem noble, courageous even, but to Chaosbringer, it was a catastrophic risk. Marching into the jaws of an enemy we don't understand, that's not courage, that's suicide, he thought, his expression darkening. If they truly are waiting for us out there, if this entire quiet is part of their plan, then the Lord might not come back alive. He closed his eyes, exhaling deeply, the weight of helplessness pressing on his chest. He could not stop Leo. He had no authority to challenge his command, nor would he ever betray his trust. But that didn't mean he had to sit still and wait for disaster. If I can't stop him, then I'll make sure he survives it, he decided, his eyes opening again with steely resolve. Even if it means going behind his back. Even if it means defying his direct orders. The army must be strengthened, the fleets must be prepared, and every contingency must be set in place before he departs. For Chaosbringer, loyalty was not about blind obedience. It was about ensuring that when the Lord walked into hell, he had a way back. And if the righteous faction thought they could outsmart the cult through fear and silence, then they had yet to see what desperation could make a man like Chaosbringer do. We will turn everything toward survival. From this hour on, we pivot to a war economy. Everything else can take a back seat. He murmured, as he began to make a mental list of everything he needed to reroute at once. I need to start with allocating more funds to advanced research in warfare. Perhaps commission new destroyer ships and speed up hull production. I also need to increase investment in simulated war drills, realistic scenarios, and night exercises. While also expanding the army, conscripting reserves, and turning volunteers into hardened units. After that, I need to start stockpiling mana stones and securing communication lines. Before finally shifting the entire economy towards a war footing, for everything else can take a back seat for now. If the Lord walks into a trap, we will not be found wanting. He counted, as each item became a stone added to a foundation he would build without asking permission. We will harden the fleet, we will harden the gates, and we will harden the men. If the enemy expects fear, we will give them preparedness. If they expect chaos, we will answer with order. He thought as he felt the taste of cold iron determination in his mouth. Chaosbringer knew the line he would cross, the oath he would bend. But he also knew the cost of inaction. Quietly, he turned away from the table, already composing the first orders he would slip into the logistics channels, already imagining the looks on supply offices. Faces when shipments were rerouted from creating new construction. zones to creating weapons. But the countdown to war began now. Although none could rival Chaosbringer in foresight or strategic obsession, the same uneasy premonition rippled through the hearts of the cult's other monarchs as well. Across the many training fields scattered throughout the time-stilled world, Supay, Dupravel, and the remaining cult commanders each felt it, the silent pull of approaching war. They did not know the exact hour or place, but the fact that they would gear up for a confrontation after the righteous faction's last stunt felt undeniable. And hence, even without direct orders, the monarchs began their own preparations. Supay drilled his army with renewed ferocity, forging discipline into instinct, as he created a corps of men who were experts in defensive formations and holding the line unlike any other. Dupravel turned on the heat, and converted his unit into the modern version of the Black Serpent's Guild, with many ferocious assassins with unconventional killing methods within his mix. They were an army of rogues, but on any battlefield, their impact could not be denied. For though time within the stilled world flowed slowly, they all knew that outside, the sands of fate were already shifting. That the war that awaited them was inevitable, and that its arrival was no longer a matter of if, but rather only when. Chapter 777 A Deal with the Devil. The Eternal Garden, the next day, Ver's POV. The next day, as the glow inside the Eternal Garden reached that soft golden hue that resembled late morning, Raymond appeared before Ver once again, his arrival sudden enough to jolt the young dragon's senses like a flicker of lightning through calm air. "Bloody hell, you scared me," Ver muttered, sitting up from the patch of grass he had been resting on. His black eyes met Raymond's, who stood only a few feet away, his expression unreadable, his aura perfectly still. Raymond tilted his head slightly, a faint crease forming between his brows. "You always sense me before I even announce myself," he said, his tone casual but his curiosity evident. "How do you do that? A mortal of your level should be incapable of that," he asked, as Ver shrugged in response, pretending nonchalance. "Dragon instincts," he said simply. "They get sharper when you're being kept in a gilded cage." Raymond's lips twitched in a half-smile, though his eyes did not soften. "I see," he replied quietly, his voice carrying that polished composure of someone trying too hard to appear relaxed. But beneath that calm exterior, there was a stiffness to his posture, a nervous tension he could not entirely mask. "So," Raymond said, folding his arms and looking down at Ver with a tone that tried to sound commanding, "have you made up your mind about teaching me those techniques?" Ver studied him for a moment. The act was good, the arrogance, the poised authority, but there was something off about it. Raymond's eyes gave him away, they darted ever so slightly, like a man who wasn't used to begging for knowledge. And it was this nervousness that made Ver even more confident that Raymond was perhaps afraid of doing this under his father's nose, just as much as he was. "Yes, I've made up my mind. But before I start teaching you, can you assure me that your father won't find out about it and punish us both?" Ver asked, as Raymond's eyes beamed at the response, his expression visibly brightening as he realized that Ver was ready to play ball. "Yes, don't worry about it. Like I said, my father can't peer into the small domain I control. As long as you train me within my small bubble, he won't find out anything," Raymond assured, as Ver finally nodded. "Fine, I'll teach you one today. The most basic one," he said. "It's called shapeshift." Raymond's lips curved upward at once, a faint, triumphant smile breaking across his face. "Excellent," he said, stepping closer. "You're making the right choice, Ver. Cooperation is always wiser than stubbornness." Ver gave a short, dry chuckle, though his expression remained neutral. "Let's just get it over with." However, before he could begin, Raymond's expression darkened slightly. His aura pulsed a controlled ripple of pressure that brushed against Ver's chest like a silent threat. "I should make one thing clear before we begin," Raymond said softly, his voice lowering to a warning tone. "I'm a master of aura, so if you lie to me, or try to mislead me, I'll know. And it won't end well for you," he threatened, as the faint smile on his face contrasted sharply with the weight of his words. Gulp. Ver swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten as the air around him grew heavier. He nodded silently, his voice refusing to come out for a moment, until eventually he said, "Understood." Raymond's pressure eased almost immediately after that, replaced once again by that calm, elegant composure he had seemed to master. "Good," he said simply, gesturing for Ver to begin. And so the lesson started. At first, Ver took it slow, explaining the concept of shapeshift and how it relied on manipulating mana to distort one's physical form while using the body's stored water to alter its muscle appearance. He demonstrated simple examples, transforming his hand into a veiny bulging one before reverting it back again. Raymond watched closely, his sharp eyes tracing every movement, every fluctuation of mana, as he grasped everything unnervingly. Quick. Within minutes, he mimicked the transformation, his hand rippling and reshaping with startling accuracy. Not bad, Ver admitted, trying not to sound too impressed. But that's just the foundation. Maintaining the shift while changing other body parts is the hard part. Raymond nodded, his focus unbroken. He closed his eyes briefly, drawing in a deep breath before his form flickered once more. One after another, he quickly learned how to alter each body part, including the bone and skin, until he reached the part of altering facial features, which took him only a few more minutes to understand. By the 25-minute mark, the only part he had not yet learned to change was the hair color, except for which, he mastered everything else. Ver muttered, watching him work. You're forcing the mana too linearly. Let it flow through the entire body at once instead of doing one part at a time. He guided, as Raymond frowned, then adjusted his technique and within seconds, his black hair shifted into a pale gold hue. Ver blinked, genuinely stunned. Half an hour. That was all it had taken. A technique that took even him and Leo several days to master had fallen before Raymond's raw comprehension in less than one. Naturally, he was learning it at the demigod tier, where his mana control and physical attributes were much superior to those of Leo and himself, but still, his comprehension was impressive nonetheless. All right, Raymond said, opening his eyes with a calm satisfaction. That's one done. What about the next technique? He demanded, as Ver raised an eyebrow, suppressing a sigh as he wagged his finger in denial. I kept my end of the deal. Now it's your turn. Raymond's grin faltered slightly. My turn. Yes, Ver said, his tone sharp now. You promised me something in return. Tell me the secret of how to become a demigod, and then maybe, we continue with this training tomorrow, once you've promised me something of equal value. For a brief moment, silence stretched between them. Raymond's gaze lingered on Ver's face, his eyes calculating, as though deciding whether he was worthy of the truth. Then, finally, he relented. I suppose you've earned that much, he said quietly. Very well, I'll tell you. His expression shifted, growing serious as the air around him thickened once more. Chapter 778 Holding up his end of the bargain. The Eternal Garden, Ver's POV. After thinking for a while about how best to structure his explanation, Raymond finally looked into Ver's eyes and raised 3 fingers. There are 3 key ingredients that make up the demigod breakthrough potion, he said. There are more, of course, but these 3 are what matter most, because their supply in the universe is extremely restricted. Ver straightened up, listening closely as Raymond began his slow, deliberate recital. The first, Raymond continued, lowering one finger, is soil from the pit. Ver frowned slightly at the name, for he had heard it before. Isn't that the place I'm being taken to be executed in a couple months? He wondered, as Raymond continued without emotion. The next, Raymond said, lowering another finger, is fresh rain water from planet Granada, that is to be collected and processed in under 30 minutes. And lastly, he lowered the third, you need the petals of the moonshine flower, which if you remember, I graciously handed to you just yesterday. He paused briefly, allowing the weight of those names to sink in before continuing, his tone calm yet carrying an unmistakable authority. These are only 3 among the several ingredients required for the potion, but they are the most critical, because each is guarded by a god who does not easily part with what belongs to him. Every grain of soil from the pit is protected by Helmuth. Every droplet of water from Granada is guarded by Morris. And every moonshine flower that blooms under this realm's light is claimed by my father. His voice hardened slightly as he spoke the last words, a faint glint of resentment flashing through his eyes before he looked away. Unless the 3 of them owe you a pretty huge favor, it's impossible to get your hands on all 3 ingredients. Ver's expression darkened as realization dawned on him. The path to the demigod tier was not just one of self-improvement or will, but rather a matter of divine politics. No wonder so few ever make it, he thought grimly as Raymond continued, his tone now carrying a strange mixture of reverence and disgust. The three great gods have a pact among themselves, he said slowly, that no one born from their bloodlines shall ascend to the demigod tier, for such a rise would shatter the fragile balance between them. And naturally, this pact extends to the cult, who are their sworn enemies. However, for outsiders, the only people with some probability of getting their hands on an ingredient, the only way to obtain all three is to curry favor with each god individually, whether it be through bribes, servitude, or soul contracts. As the few who do manage to ascend, always do it at a great personal cost, often being forced into a lifetime of servitude under all three gods, as their hunt for higher power turns them into nothing more than glorified slaves. He leaned back slightly, his cold eyes narrowing. This is also why there have been no new demigods in the last 5 centuries. Not one. For the requirements to become one are too stringent, and even if you do manage to become one, your life afterwards is still no better than that of a common slave. He paused briefly, as if almost by accident, then added in a softer tone, well, almost. A flicker of pride ghosted across his face, but it vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only that polished composure once more, as he decided to hold himself back from bragging about the fact that he beat this cursed system. Ver caught the hesitation but decided not to question it, as Raymond went on, his voice low but precise. The flower I gave you yesterday, the moonshine flower, is one of the rarest materials in existence. It costs talented warriors their souls to obtain it, and even then, they must wait for decades for my father to allot them one. So be grateful for it, young dragon, for it is truly an unparalleled treasure. He finished, letting the final word echo faintly through the tranquil garden. Ver exhaled slowly, his brows furrowing as he absorbed every detail. Now it made sense as to why demigod ascension was so rare across the universe, and why even Charles, despite his brilliance, had never crossed into that divine realm. 3 gods, 3 treasures, 3 locked gates that none could pass without offering something irreplaceable. He could feel a quiet unease building inside him, the same kind of dread that accompanied the realization of just how insignificant one could be beneath cosmic powers. What am I even thinking about? He thought bitterly. That's a very distant future. First I need to survive. Then maybe I can dream about ascension. He nodded slowly, regaining his composure, before meeting Raymond's gaze again. All right, Ver said at last. You've kept your word. I find the knowledge you shared today acceptable. He paused briefly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he added, however. If you want more from me tomorrow, then you must offer more in return. Raymond's lips curved in amusement. More, you say? He chuckled softly, the sound calm but carrying an underlying confidence that felt both arrogant and enticing. Fine. Teach me another method tomorrow, he said, and I'll pass down forbidden knowledge about the 3 governing laws of the universe to you. It will be a rudimentary explanation, but worth 20 times the value of what you've taught me. Ver looked at him silently for a few seconds before extending his hand. Deal, he said firmly, as Raymond grasped it without hesitation, his grip strong and unnervingly cold. In that moment, an unspoken pact took form between them, a pact of deceit and curiosity, of danger disguised as cooperation. And though the warm glow of the eternal garden remained tranquil as ever, somewhere deep within its still air, the first sparks of a far greater storm had begun to stir. For although Raymond thought he was sharing forbidden knowledge with Ver, that was never going to reach cult hands because of his impending execution. In his attempt to cozy up to Ver, he was still giving up way more secrets than he otherwise should have. Chapter 779 Increased Difficulty. Meanwhile, Leo's paw, the time-stilled world. Training-filled days began to pass quickly for Leo as he resumed his relentless push toward the impossible goal of defeating 1,000,000 opponents back-to-back. Yet somewhere near the 775,000th victory mark, the parameters of his trials changed once again. The previous restrictions, fighting with bound limbs, blinded by cloth, and being wrapped with balloon targets, had already forced him to evolve his instincts far beyond human reason. But even that was no longer enough. He had grown too strong, and hence, for the master-tier opponents he now faced to stand at least a 50% chance against him, something more severe had to be introduced. And as a result, a new limiter was added to his battle gear. A soft cushion cap, harmless in appearance, was strapped over his head, dulling the impact of every strike he made, as his once devastating headbutts, the final weapon he relied on when cornered, were now rendered less effective. As what had once been a finishing blow was now reduced to nothing more than a dull bump against his opponent's guard. It was a small change, yet it stripped him of one of his sharpest edges, as now, the fights turned into drawn-out slugfests where every exchange felt longer, slower, and more exhausting. With his mobility limited by the binds, his sight sealed beneath the blindfold, and his final weapon muted, every victory became a matter of endurance and precision. The battles he now fought became tough to the point where even a single mistake meant defeat, while to bring down his opponent, he needed to land 10 or 15 clean blows, each perfectly placed, each carrying his full power, while never allowing a single strike to reach him in return. The air inside the combat chamber felt thick, heavy with the smell of mana residue and steel dust. Leo stood motionless in the center, his breath calm, his heartbeat steady beneath the layers of restriction. Then came the metallic hiss of the gate, with the faint shuffle of footsteps following steady and heavy. Leo felt the air shift, warm and turbulent, and in that tiny change, he sensed everything he needed to know. His opponent was large and his footsteps were stiff, which meant that he was a power-heavy fighter with a muscular build over a flexible one. He mused, and as soon as the countdown reached 0, shifted to battle stance. Swoosh! A rush of air brushed past his cheek, close enough for him to feel its warmth. The strike carried real intent, and had he been a second slower, it would have met his jaw. Faster than the average fighter. He assessed, as he leaned back instinctively, letting the attack slice through empty space before springing forward on bound legs. Hop! Because of the binding, he could not step or pivot freely, every motion of his limited to awkward, short hops that demanded perfect balance. His arms were tied firmly behind his back, his wrists pressing tightly together, while his ankles were locked by reinforced bindings that gave him just enough space to move but not enough to stride. Every breath, every shift of weight had to be deliberate, calculated, and silent. No arms, no legs, no vision, and now even my headbutts are useless. Perfect, he thought bitterly, adjusting his stance through a faint shuffle. Let's see what's left to fight with. The opponent's footsteps echoed softly across the chamber floor, heavy and assured, betraying the presence of a seasoned fighter. Each step came closer, measured and confident, followed by a low growl of anticipation. Then came the next attack. A sharp gust of air struck from the left. Leo ducked, bending at the knees and lowering his center of gravity as the punch sliced above his head. He hopped sideways, narrowly avoiding a second strike that followed like thunder after lightning. The blindfold cut away all sight, forcing him to rely on everything else: the faintest sound of shifting fabric, the whisper of air displacement, even the rhythm of the opponent's breathing. A low hum filled his mind with a mental map created from sound. Alone, where he could visualize his enemy's every movement. Too predictable, he thought, bending forward just in time to let a roundhouse kick fly past his face. He retaliated with what little freedom he had. His body twisted, and his knee shot upward, striking into his opponent's thigh, as the impact made the opponent grunt but not stagger. A hand lashed out, catching his shoulder, and the next moment, a loud pop sound could be heard as his opponent managed to burst the first balloon. Pop! Drip! Water began to drip down his side, as he now remained one balloon pop away from losing his streak. However, instead of letting the pressure affect him, he used the rebound to tilt his weight forward, letting gravity do what his bindings would not, as he sprang upward and forward in a single motion and smashed his cushioned head straight into the man's chin. Thud! The soft padding muted the blow, but the sheer speed behind it made the opponent stumble back with a strangled growl. So it works if I push hard enough, Leo thought, breathing raggedly. However, unfortunately for him, the opponent regained his footing and came at him again, his movements flaring with aggression. Swoosh! Swoosh! Block! Leo shifted his stance, bouncing once to the right and once backward, barely evading a sweeping hook that would have popped his neck balloon, before blocking a low sweep with the sole of his feet, as he waited for the next punch, counting the rhythm of his opponent's breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Then came the swing, but he moved before it landed, jumping toward the sound instead of away from it, as he twisted his shoulder to meet the punch head-on. Bam! The impact jolted through him, but since the balloon on that end was already popped, He did not suffer additional damage, while hissed. Momentum threw the opponent off balance. Stagger. The opponent staggered, and that was the opportunity he needed to end the fight as he spun on his heels and threw his body weight sideways, slamming his shoulder into the man's abdomen, as he tackled him hard to the ground and pinned him to the floor. Thud. The sound was heavy, final. The opponent fell, gasping, as he felt a couple ribs inside his chest snap from the force. "Oh fuck, that was close," Leo mumbled, as he stood back up, his body trembling from exertion. The bindings cutting deep against his skin as sweat rolled down his neck. "Winner, Lord Shadow Dragon," the referee announced, as Leo lowered his head, breathing heavily. 775,002, he thought, his lips curving faintly into a tired smile. Still standing. Chapter 780 Doubling Down. The Eternal Garden. Next day, Ver's POV. Next day, around the same golden hour that marked late morning in the Eternal Garden, Raymond appeared once again, stepping out from between the crystalline branches with the same smooth confidence as before, his calm aura rippling faintly through the still air like an unseen tide. Ver, who had been sitting cross-legged beneath one of the glass trees, opened his eyes slowly and greeted him with a nod, his tone neutral yet steady. "You came," he said simply, as Raymond inclined his head in acknowledgement before gesturing toward the open clearing ahead. "Let us begin," Raymond replied, his words quiet yet carrying the faint authority of someone who had long grown used to being obeyed. "The move I'm about to teach you today," Ver began, rising to his feet and dusting off the faint shimmer of pollen from his robes, "is called Enhance." Raymond's gaze sharpened at once, his interest apparent as he folded his arms across his chest and waited for the explanation to unfold. "Using Enhance," Ver continued, "you can temporarily increase the strength of any muscle within your body dramatically. It's best used for sudden bursts of movement or when you need to endure blows that would otherwise be difficult to meet head-on. Think of it as a short-duration buff, a surge of power that lets your body exceed its usual limit for a brief moment in time." He demonstrated the stance with calm precision, his posture straightening as his body suddenly drew in mana from all corners of the mana circuits and redirected them towards his arm, tightening the fibers of his muscles until the veins beneath his skin glowed faintly. The air around him pulsed, vibrating softly before settling again into quiet stillness. "It's not a technique meant for recklessness," Ver explained, relaxing his stance. "Used properly, it can turn defense into offense, and offense into survival." Raymond's eyes glinted with a spark of admiration as he listened. He already knew of a similar move within his own repertoire, one that could also temporarily amplify muscle output, yet that version came with a severe drawback. Once its energy faded, the body would enter a state of brief exhaustion, its strength plummeting for several seconds, a fatal window in real combat. But this technique, the one Ver was describing, carried no such limitations. It seemed cleaner, more refined, a version perfected through subtle understanding of mana flow rather than brute manipulation of energy. A superior variant, he thought, his mind already dissecting the principles behind it. No recoil, no fatigue. Interesting. For the next 2 hours, Ver guided him through every subtle motion, every breath adjustment, every layer of mana control that formed the backbone of the technique. Yet unlike shapeshift, this one proved far more complex to execute. Raymond struggled to grasp the exact mana distribution within his body. As whenever he tried to activate it, his mana either flared too wildly or collapsed inwards, leaving him gasping from the pressure. "Too forceful," Ver remarked calmly, shaking his head as he circled him. "You're treating mana like a whip when you should treat it like blood. It must flow through you clean, not jerk fully." Raymond exhaled, nodding slightly as he tried again, this time with more restraint. But although his form steadied, the effect still flickered out midway. "You're learning quickly," Ver said, his tone measured, "but this one won't be mastered in a single day." Raymond chuckled faintly at that, his lips curling into a faint, self-aware smile. "So it seems," he admitted, turning his gaze toward the tranquil sky above. "We have been at this for 2 hours already, but I'm nowhere close to mastering it. I suppose I'll have to take my leave for now. If I linger any longer, my father will sense something to be amiss." Raymond admitted, as Ver nodded in quiet agreement and watched him disappear through the crystalline veil that guarded the garden's inner layer. The following day passed, and then another, their lessons continuing in much the same rhythm, patient repetition, silent progress, and small bursts of shared understanding. Until finally, on the third day, Raymond stood before him again, and this time, Ver could see him closing in on the breakthrough. By now, he had understood the concept of enhanced completely and could now redirect mana from his entire circuit towards one particular organ in an instant, which was the fuel necessary to carry out enhance. The only thing missing was the last step, the understanding on how to use all that fuel up fast for enhanced muscle output, but Ver did not feel too worried. It seemed like Raymond would figure out that part pretty soon. Boom! A low rumble followed as the air itself seemed to vibrate with restrained power, and when Raymond clenched his fists, the ground beneath his feet cracked softly in response. Crack! He exhaled, a faint smile crossing his lips as he did not push further. For trying moves like jumping or unleashing his strength would make it obvious that he was training, and would be hard to conceal from his father. This is a worthy technique, he said, his voice calm but edged with quiet satisfaction. Thank you for teaching it to me. Ver raised an eyebrow, his tone sharp yet light. No, 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 he said, wagging his finger once in mock disapproval. A thank you isn't enough. We made a deal, remember? If you think my technique is worthy, then you owe me the knowledge you promised. Ver demanded, as Raymond's laughter echoed faintly across the clearing, smooth and low, as he folded his hands behind his back. Very well, he said, his eyes glimmering with that same dangerous composure Ver was beginning to recognize. I'll tell you something that only demigods and gods discover once they reach that stage of power. He paused, letting the air between them grow still, his tone lowering into something grave yet magnetic. There are 3 absolute laws in the universe, he began, that mortals can never understand, while even among the demigods, few will ever master. But since you've given me strength, I'll give you a head start on them, he said, his words drawing Ver's full attention, as the young dragon leaned forward slightly, his expression curious, his pulse steady but his heart filled with intrigue, ready to hear what kind of secret could only be known to the beings who had touched the edge of godhood. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.